across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome here to the Business Side with me, Jonathan Gullis, joining and stepping in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan today. We're here between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. and blimey, what a show we've got again for you today. And joining me in the studio for the very first segment is the former head of press for Reform UK and political commentator Gawain Towler. Gawain, lovely to have you.
I'm happy to be here.
Now, the big story of today is Nigel Farage once again is making airwaves all over the country. His big speech, where some people are now saying, is he Corbyn in disguise? It's all about lifting the two-child benefit cap, introducing a new tax marriage allowance to be transferable, and reinstating the winter fuel payment. But let's hear, first of all, what Nigel had to say.
If we win the next election, we will scrap net zero, something that is costing the Exchequer an extraordinary £40 billion plus every year. There will be no more asylum hotels or houses of multiple occupancy. People who come here illegally across the channel or on the back of lorries will not be allowed to stay. We will scrap the DEI agenda, which is costing the taxpayer up to £7 billion a year throughout the public sector.
So there we have it, Nigel Farage scrapping net zero, scrapping DEI and making sure that we have a robust public sector that's working in the interest of British people. But he also had some very choice words about the Prime Minister. What did Nigel have to say about Sir Keir Starmer?
Starmer's promises, look, do you know what? I just think there are two types of people in politics. Those who want to be something, those who want to do something. For him, it was about becoming Prime Minister. For me, it's about turning this country around. Simple as that.
But he didn't spare his ammunition for Sir Keir Starmer. He also decided to have a go at what he now describes as the minor party, the Conservative Party.
If you want a party to be the opposition party to this Labour government, then it's a Conservative vote that would be a wasted vote. It's a Conservative vote that actually would help keep Labour in power. And that is the absolutely fundamental shift of public perception that has happened after May the 1st. Over 40% of people who voted Conservative at the last election actually wanted to vote Reform, but didn't do it because they thought it would be a wasted vote. And that has been completely and utterly destroyed as an argument. Now, of course, we have a lot to do now that we're in office, and there is a heavy burden of responsibility on the shoulders of many in this room. And our DOGE unit has now been set up. You'll be hearing much more about that. We firmly established which flags we will and won't fly from Council Hall, something that is very popular with the public. And we are already beginning to discover excessive wastes of money in local government.
Well, we heard some strong words there. Now, of course, Nigel Farage was facing pressure on how to make the sums add up. The IFS, for example, today has said that the estimated cost will be between £50 and £80 billion. That's including the increase of the personal tax-free allowance from £12,500 to £20,000. So is Nigel Farage falling into the trap that both Conservatives in 2019 and Labour in 2024 made, which is over-promising and therefore likely to under-deliver? Well, I'm glad to say Gawain is here with us in the studio, as I say, former head of press for Reform UK. Gawain, big speech for Nigel Farage, really setting out a stall and certainly getting the feathers ruffled both in CCHQ for the Conservatives and in number 10 for Labour. Is Nigel a secret softy lefty?
No. If you look at what he said he was going to do, notwithstanding the welfare side of things, the taxation side of things, on net zero, and of course on mass immigration, and on DEI, this is hardly a soft lefty. This is not somebody who's brought up in the third sector. This is not somebody who spent their life as a solicitor or a charity worker. This is somebody who has lived in the real world, worked in the real world, set up businesses and done things like that. And he sees that you can be both pro-worker and pro-work. And to get work, you need to invigorate the private sector, invigorate the entrepreneurs of this country, because they are the people who employ people. And when people chuck rocks at him for saying they don't like this new employment legislation the government's bringing in, well, it's actually anti-work. There's no point in having employment rights if you haven't got a job in the first place. And making it harder for people to employ people means fewer people have jobs. It's as simple as that. We already have many of the things that the government are trying to push and making claims over. But when it comes to, I don't think the Conservatives would have done what Labour did on the winter fuel allowance. In fact, Labour promised not to during the general election. So it's a bit of a surprise to everybody, the winter fuel allowance. And just going back to the situation anti the Labour government is now seen as an appalling waste of... Hold on, no, that was the norm. It was absolutely just going back to the norm. And when it comes to the transferable tax allowance, I think this is one of the best things that the party has put forward. To be fair, it's something that UKIP believed in many years ago and Farage has always believed in, because it is good for the society, it's good for families, it's good for a whole range of things. And the investment in our children is what we're all about. I mean, he bangs on about family, community, country. Well, let's get look at the family. Let's see how we can help them. And if you then push up the 20%, it depends how you then follow through with that. If you go to, it's tax-free to 20%, so somebody who is earning 21,000 rather than 20,000 a year, up to 20,000 a year, 20,000, and somebody's earning 21,000 finds themselves paying more tax than somebody who's earning less than somebody on 20,000, that doesn't work. So there has to be slight change in the tax curve after that 20,000. This can be done, and if you do that, you ensure that this benefit is directed and targeted at those at very small incomes and does not... The ballooning of costs that the IFS are talking about and things of this sort is because they assume that somebody on 200,000 a year also gets that benefit, as opposed to somebody, just the people in the low wages. If you work with the tax curve, then you can do that without benefiting the rich, but specifically targeting those who need it most.
You talk about business and obviously wanting to be on the side of work as well as workers. Is it not a case, though, that work, the private sector that is the economic growth vehicle for this country, will be questioning why Nigel wants to burden the state with an extra £5 billion worth of spending and essentially say to parents who can't afford to have children, don't worry, the taxpayer will pick up the bill? Why should the taxpayer pay for people who can't afford their own children?
Well, there's the... Kemi was going on about this, the Tory leader was going on about this, and she seems to be having that rather strong view. You sort of can't breed them, you can't feed them, don't breed them. That's all very well. And yes, I can see why people say that's not fair. But if you look at this policy as part of a broad range of policies, we do want to encourage people in this country to have children. And to do that, there's a whole range of things you have to do. Young people today look at the future. Many of them are saying we don't want children at all because we can't afford to leave home. We can't afford to get a house. We can't afford to do these things. All those things that my parents' generation and even I could see as my future are now just not possible. Partially because of mass migration and the vast increase in cost of housing, partially and that reduction of wages. The way that the economy has been driven based on low wage, low skill immigration for the larger corporations has absolutely devastated the views of the future for many young people. So this is just one rock in the wall that we need to build to ensure that people feel confident in their country's future and therefore confident in their own personal and private future to have children and to go forward.
But again, with having children, I completely agree with you, declining birth rate is very worrying, but again, they will come back to the fact that why should people who are choosing to have multiple children and can't afford them, why should the taxpayer who are doing the right thing working for people? Adam Brooks, who I know has been very sympathetic to Reform UK, was very punchy on social media saying this is completely against what he thought Reform UK would stand for. The polling suggests that 10 to 15% from More in Common are in favour, 10 to 15% more people are in favour of keeping the cap rather than scrapping it. How is Nigel going to keep the base, the core voters, happy when he's pivoting to essentially what many people would say Corbynism?
Oh, it's hardly Corbynism, but I think what you've got to understand that this is one of a large panoply of policies that fits in. It isn't standalone. It doesn't exist in its own environment. It exists across the board. So if you're cutting the net zero, it's not just the cost on government, the 40 billion talking about there. You're also reducing the cost on business significantly. And you'll be helping business by doing that. You'll be helping individuals in their homes. The 300 quid an extra a year it's costing because of the net zero subsidies and all the rest of it. So it doesn't just help government, it helps business because it reduces their costs, and thus it helps people because it increases their income and it helps the cost of living crisis. So yes, this is one thing, and I can see why some people might think it's unfair, but it cannot be seen as a standalone policy. It is part of a much broader range of things to try and turn our country round. And it is, personally, he was talking about it's just for British people. I need to see the detail. I haven't seen the granular detail of exactly what he meant. And funnily enough, that I heard him say it in the speech. I wasn't there for the questions, and so therefore, and what I understand is nobody asked him about that particular detail, but it was there. So what does he mean by that? Is he saying that again? Is the two-child cap going to be a universal? And I have to say, back in the day, my mother used to describe child benefit as her gin allowance. She got it whether she wanted it or not. That is absurd. That situation where people who were well off were just able, and literally she spent the child benefit for me every week on a bottle of gin because she could. That cannot be the way forward. But I haven't seen the granular detail, so I'm not perfectly at liberty to give you a solid answer to that, and I'm sorry about that.
Do you find it a bit rich when we hear criticisms from both Conservative and Labour? This is unfunded promises that Nigel is trying to find the magic money tree. Well, I was about to say, you know, in the lead up to the last general election, Labour kept going on that they had a fully costed plan to implement in government, and in fact, if anything, we've seen the complete opposite. The Conservatives, I'm sure, would have made promises about the tens of thousands of migration never occurred, as well as obviously other spending commitments too, some which would argue was unfunded promises that were made, like the 40 new hospitals. Do you just think it's a bit rich? Why is it only reform that people are throwing this rock at? And actually, has reform got the benefit of what Labour's got, which is they have got time to come up with the very specific detail that people want to see come the election?
Labour don't have that benefit because they're in government and they're living it in real time. We do have a couple of years to put it together. I think he said in the speech also, come back to me in a year and I'll explain the costings. We haven't got all that sorted. Government isn't, again, a single policy issue. It is across the board. These things have to tie and dovetail in together. But if he's putting a flag in the sand and saying, this we're going to stick with, this we're going to stick with, we're now starting to see in various policy areas solid ideas. But that has to be tied together in a comprehensive and cohesive policy agenda, which is costed. But you're right. I mean, Labour came into government within minutes. They're claiming, and nobody's found it, the 22 billion black hole somewhere under the North Sea, I think. There's that. And then they immediately round on people like farmers, who they promised to do otherwise. They promised to keep the winter fuel allowance, and they rounded on pensioners. Everywhere you look, they seem to be attacking people. Fishermen are the latest victims to their depredations. So it is a bit rich, but that's fine. It's not rich, actually. Anybody who presumes to be the government of this country, anybody who presumes to take the trust of the people of this country and take that into government deserves and needs to be held to scrutiny. And it's like complaining about scrutiny. If you're a politician, it's like the fish complaining about the sea. So, no, it's not rich. Yes, we expect them to attack us. People aren't stupid. They're well aware we should be held to account, but they do also hold the other lot to account. And so it's a question of credibility. It's a question of being able to do what you say. With those local councils that we done the other week, we're now in a position to prove our competence and our abilities to do things. Given that they, and I believe they will, perform effectively and perform well, then the people of this country can see reform in action, in a position of responsibility, and then they look and say, OK, they did what they said there. Maybe we can trust them to do what they say in government. And I'll give you an example of this. Giorgia Meloni won a couple of regional governments in Italy. They performed well. And it was only after that the people of Italy gave her a chance to be Prime Minister. And I think that'll be the same for us.
Now, we see your Find Out Now poll came out today suggesting Reform on 32 and Labour in second place on 21. So a big need for Reform UK. But then YouGov, interestingly, then reduced a poll that says that Nigel is likely to be... Nigel is 15% less popular than Keir Starmer. He's 14% less popular than Ed Davey. And apparently he's 4% less popular than Kay Badenoch. Do you find this a bit odd? And is this why, actually, out of interest, Labour are making such a thing about Reform being the official opposition. Labour believe that when it comes to Keir versus Nigel, they will be able to squeeze voters who are scared of Nigel.
Well, Keir challenged Nigel to a debate. Come on, then. Come on. Let's do it. Nigel said so. Farage said so today. Let's not wait 4 years. Let's do it as soon as possible. You claim that you represent the working people of this country. We think we are better representatives of the working people of this country, and that's not a class-based thing. I'm watching the chairman of the Labour Party bang on about public school and this, that and the other. I mean, really, haven't we got beyond that? Clearly not in the case of Labour. They're stuck in some sort of student socialist madness.
Well, they did say, Gray, didn't they, that they said that, what does Nigel know? Because Keir is the son of a toolmaker whose phone was taken offline, back in the day whilst Nigel was cosy in Dulwich College, as was the attack.
Yeah, and son of a toolmaker, son of a factory owner who made tools. I mean, Keir did not come from the back streets. Keir was not brought up in a gutter, and any suggestion he was is for the birds. He knows it. We all know it. No, the whole class war thing. It was almost hysterically funny to see Labour do that. How desperate are they? They're trying to bring some 1970s trope into things. It's like we've moved on, chap.
Well, what's interesting, Wayne, is I'm looking to the elections next year. I look back at 2022, and I think Labour were left with 2,200 councillors in places like Birmingham, in places like all the London boroughs that'll be up for election. But then Rotherham, Bury, Tyneside, Coventry, 2,200 councillors. Tameside, indeed, and even Manchester, where Angela Rayner is looking pretty rocky. Labour must be getting pretty worried, especially when polls suggest they could now be third in Wales and third in Scotland, losing their ability to even call themselves the government or the opposition in each of those countries.
Pardon me while I snigger. Look, we have to prove what we can do. Those councils will have had a year experience, or people will have had a year experience of living under reform-led county councils. We will be able to point to success or failure, and those will no doubt be pointed to. We will point to the successes, and I'm sure Labour and the Tories will point to the failures. But that will be up to the people of those areas to vote. But if you look at something like Tameside, a couple of weeks ago we won a by-election from 0 to 56%.
Stoke-on-Trent, 0 to 58.5%.
And in Wigan, and places like this. This is happening out there. And yes, the fact is that there they are, the Labour Party fighting their class war. But you listen to Keir, and in your head you listen to what he's been saying recently about various things, policies, and you can see in your head, there he is wearing his tweed jacket, his mustard cords, he's got a pint in one hand, a cigarette in the other. The sincerest form of flattery, as we all know, is doing exactly what Keir's doing now, but he does it without conviction and without any sense of what he's for. And I've been saying that about the Tory party for years. They don't know what they're for, but now it's clear that Labour just don't know what they're for.
Well, on my final question, Gawain, there's a lot of talk saying Kemi's done, Boris should come back, and then we found out Conservative MPs anonymously briefing saying that there is, quote, no appetite, and that a shadow cabinet minister said they couldn't think of, quote, a single one of their colleagues that wanted Boris Johnson back.
Actually,
are Reform UK scared
heard
of Boris Johnson coming back? Is he going to be your kryptonite?
No. There are many people in the Tory party, I know quite a few, who see Boris Johnson as some sort of Jacobite pretender in the Isle of Skye, just about to row across with Flora MacDonald at the front after he's got her pregnant, and then land, and he'll land in the Glens, and he'll march into England and get defeated at Derby and run away again. It just seems to me, bizarre, absolutely bizarre, that a party feels that somebody they threw out because he was a disaster 3 years ago is their great white hope. It seems absolutely ridiculous.
Do you not think if Boris, for example, apologised over the Boris wave, the peak spike in migration, the public would give him much more leeway because he is sort of some lovable rogue?
He's a lovable rogue, and I think he has to stay in the lovable rogue section. I do not think he stays in the competent politician section. He was responsible for the Boris wave and things of this sort. He lied. He promised things. I mean, you should hear his speech to conference where he basically says everything that Farage has been saying for years about we cannot go for low wage immigration. We mustn't do that. We cannot. We must promise the tens of thousands, this and this sort. And what did he do in power? He did completely the opposite. And I don't think, there may be some dyed-in-the-wool Tories who have a great deal of affection for him, but the country, give over.
Is it desperation?
I think the Tories are slightly desperate, yes, because Jenrick is there writing policy cheques that the party will never cash. He's trying to, again, there's another one who's trying to out-Farage. Really, there should be a shop on Whitehall just selling tweed.
I like that very much. Gawain Towler, thank you so much for joining us today. And make sure, listeners, that you call in and tell us what you think, what Gawain was saying. Are you happy with Nigel Farage saying we're going to scrap the two-child benefit cap? Are you happy to hear that he would increase the personal tax threshold to 20,000? Are you happy with the very interesting idea that we're going to be talking to the Centre for Social Justice next about, which is having this personal tax allowance transferable for those who are married? Is it time that we had pro-family, pro-marriage policy that is going to help the declining birth rate? You can call in 0344 499 1000, text in with the word talk to the start of 87222 and follow us on X at talkTV. We'll see you shortly.
It is a team game.
Yeah.
And Rupert, I think, is constitutionally unable to be a team player. Now, there are things that could have been done to mitigate that. He could have been given work to do. The devil does make work for idle hands. He could have been given a job. Go away and draft and come up with an immigration policy, Rupert. Come back to us after doing the hard work, doing the hard graft, doing the miles, getting the information, doing the research. Come back to us with a reasoned, considered immigration policy to take forward to 2029. That would have been a useful thing.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back with me, Jonathan Gullis, here on the home of common sense, that is Talk. I'm stepping in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan on his Political Asylum show between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. today. And we have had the first great guest, Gawain Towler, talking about the politics about Nigel Farage's announcements today. But today, we now then pivot to the policy, which is actually Nigel Farage is pledging tax breaks for married couples to encourage them to have bigger families. Well, actually, this is an interesting idea that came from the Centre for Social Justice in their report called Give Families Credit in June 2024. I'm delighted that Joe Shullum, Director of Policy at the Centre for Social Justice, is joining us on the line now. Hey, Joe, how are you?
Hi, good, thanks.
Well, look, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, first of all, I'd love to get your take, as from the Centre for Social Justice, of what was it like to hear a policy which was centred around tackling the declining birth rate and encouraging family, where we know the statistics show if a child does grow up in a household, in a loving household with two parents who are married, then actually the outcomes for them, both in their mental health, their physical health and their educational outcomes, is dramatically improved.
I mean, I do think it's worth us sort of recognising just how rare it is for politicians, mainstream politicians, to be talking about family at all. And that's got to be welcome. We do see leaders with often sort of checkered marital histories very nervous to step into this this area. You know, quickly accusations of kind of moral hectoring and things like that do come about. But we can't have a blind spot to family. It is obviously incredibly important to practically all of us in a day-to-day sense, but across all of society, whether we're looking at educational outcomes, at employment outcomes, and even our health, family is right there at the bedrock. So credit to Reform and to Nigel Farage for starting that conversation today, even if there are some fiscal questions about the implementation of some of these policies.
Well, I was about to say, I think the report, as I say, Give Families Credit from the Centre for Social Justice, written in June 2024, suggested if the personal tax allowance that's £12,500 is maintained as it is, that there would then be the ability for 100% transferable, which I think was estimated to be between £3 and £6 billion. But what Nigel Farage is saying is that he will have the tax-free allowance up to £20,000, and then 25%, aka £5,000, would be allowed to be moved from one partner to the next. Do you worry about the policy because of that 20,000, which obviously is going to come at a much bigger cost, that personal tax allowance? Would you like to see it written as the Centre for Social Justice suggested?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that we are an outlier here in the UK. You know, you look at France, you look at Germany, the US, they have tax systems that are much better at looking at the household in the round and recognising the challenge that it is for parents to raise families and seeing children as more of a public asset than a liability. We have a much more individualised approach here, and so it's very welcome that these proposals are now being looked at by Reform to sort of turn that around. Now, the question of the personal tax allowance, I think, really gets to the heart of the delivery point that I made earlier. You know, is it going to be possible to introduce such a significant increase in the personal tax allowance from the get-go? It seems like the Reform leadership have backed away from a kind of initial 100-day pledge. But whether or not they're able to implement that personal tax allowance increase, the principle of moving to a household-based model that begins to recognise the importance of family in our tax code cannot be anything but a good thing.
Out of interest, again, there will be lots of people, like you say, who you can imagine, particularly in Westminster, the bubble, will say, why are you helping married couples? What about those couples who choose not to get married? What about single parents who do a fantastic job? Why are we being snotty about them? Or is that getting to the heart of the problem, that there's an argument to be made about we should just need to have frank, honest conversations about what the evidence provides? And if you could just give a bit of example of what data maybe you've seen at the Centre for Social Justice about how a married couple with looking after their child can have a better outcome for their children.
Well, I think that the key thing here is to recognise that it is by no means either or. You know, whatever your family situation, if you fall into hardship, if you are struggling, you know, if you have additional needs that need to be met, there should be support available for you. So that's the kind of the starting point. But I think what needs to happen is a kind of a rectification of the imbalance that we've seen over the years, where families haven't been given the kind of support they need to produce children, and frankly, we see a huge imbalance in the desire for more parenthood. We've got a fertility rate of about 1.5 at the moment, and I think the desired output is about just over 2. So there are things going wrong there, whether it's from housing to tax to other things. And as you say, the longer term sort of outcomes that we see, whether it's homelessness, whether it's falling into the criminal justice system and other things, are very, very pronounced when children experience family breakdown in the home as well. So we have to support families, and we've got to have this national conversation about how best to do that.
Do you think, I thought one of the things that was interesting, what Nigel said today, was he was making that link, as you say, that if we have more children being born, then that will be more people who are able to enter our workforce, which actually will counter longer term the need for high levels of net migration, and actually making that very distinctive link. Some people might feel uncomfortable, but isn't it just a reality that if we're going to not need to pull on the lever of migration, we need to have more children?
I mean, I think that it's a bit of a false choice at times. I mean, I do think there is a third element, which is about productivity increases in our economy. Ultimately, the problem here is that we have a very fast aging society and a population pyramid that is unsustainable. So how do you go about solving that? Well, the levers of having more children and increasing productivity are there in a way that, frankly, the easier lever that might have been pulled in the past of immigration. I don't think you can present that as an alternative where we know from other data around the kind of the net contribution of particularly low-skilled migration. They also contribute to this population pyramid issue. They also require the kind of services, pensions themselves over time. So, yes, I think it's right that we are increasing the support for people to have children. I don't think it can be presented solely as a way of solving this issue of an ageing population, where the focus really has to be on increasing the productivity in our economy over the long term.
And then final one from me, Joe. I don't suppose the Centre for Social Justice has a position around this two-child cap benefit. Is it something that the Centre for Social Justice would support seeing scrapped? Does it believe that it's keeping children trapped in poverty, or does it believe it's a fair mechanism and there's other things that could be done with the taxation system?
I mean, look, I think there are compelling arguments either way on this one. I can see in and of itself a very strong fairness case for how the incentives that apply to working families not in receipt of universal credit should apply to those in receipt of universal credit. Equally, I am taken by the argument that our whole fiscal benefit architecture needs to be much more focused towards supporting families. And so I'm erring to the latter in this case. But I think, as with all of these things, whether or not they are, it's possible to pay for them given the very, very limited fiscal headroom we have as a country at the moment. That also has to be paramount. Is that the best use of money in terms of how to help thousands of people out of poverty at the moment? I'm not convinced that it is compared to the other things that are out there.
Thank you very much, Joe Shalom, Director of Policy at the Centre for Social Justice, for joining us today. Well, you've heard it there. We've heard that this is a welcome conversation regarding family, regarding the positives of marriage. Do you think this is something that should be discussed more by our mainstream politicians? Is the gauntlet now being thrown down to both Labour and Conservative when it comes to these policies? Labour on the two-child cap benefit, the Conservatives on making family policy much more friendly and fairer in the tax system. Ring in 0344 499 1000 or text in with the word talk to the start of your message to 87222, or follow us on X at talkTV. We'll see you shortly.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back with me, Jonathan Gullis, sitting in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan here on the Political Asylum and Talk, the home of common sense. And I'm now joined in the studio by a great friend of ours here on Talk, Tim Montgomery, political commentator, who I believe was at the press conference from Nigel Farage today.
Yeah.
Tim, go on, what was your takeaway? What did you think of this big Trumpian spectacle, some would say, with the long speech, the long press conference? Was it a good thing to see?
First of all, I don't know, did you see the whole speech?
Bits and pieces, bits and pieces.
The beginning was the best bit. He's an amazing observer of the political scene, and his description of the reality is that we're seeing something very special in British politics. We've seen the Conservative Party fail over 14 years, and we're seeing Labour fail even more quickly over just barely 1 year. And that's a massive opening for reform. And I think, there's lots of political phenomena in this country that come through particular events. But the reason why I think reform might be an enduring phenomenon is because we are seeing both of the main parties fail at the same time. And that's rare, perhaps even unique, and it gives reform the opportunity. So he was very good in that part. I liked his individual measures. I support raising the two-child cap, for example. I like the support for marriage. The challenge for reform, and I don't sort of rule my, it's early in the Parliament, they can get it right. But at the moment, we face a situation where this country could go bankrupt, Jonathan, in the next few years. I seriously think that it's just as in the 1970s, the IMF had to bail Britain out, that could happen again. And reform have to get to a place, not necessarily now, not necessarily in the next few months, but certainly in the next year or so, where people of credibility can look at the overall spending plans and tax plans and say, these add up. I think, in all honesty, you can't say that at the moment. I think it's early in the Parliament. Reform can say, we'll get there, and we don't know the state of the public finances. But that's the weakness of reform. That is probably their number one, their number two, and their number three weakness that they have to address.
I was about to say the IFS.
We have to address, I should say.
Well, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the IFS, has put out today that they estimate that the pledges made, including the 20,000 personal tax-free allowance, would cost in the region of 50 to 80 billion pounds. This goes to the point Nigel Farage saying that scrapping net zero would save 45 billion, ending DEI, diversity, equality and inclusion, 7 billion, ending the asylum hotels, 4 billion, and cutting Quango budgets by 5% would be another 5 billion. That's 61 billion, kind of just in the middle of those figures, if those figures do add up. And people will say, it's all well and good emptying the hotels, where are they going to go, and what the cost of that going to be? You say about that credibility, is this an opening for the Conservative Party to try and regain, who at the moment polls to suggest are leading of all parties when it comes to being seen the most competent with the economy?
Yeah, I think it's a small opening for the Conservatives. I think the trouble for the Conservatives is people aren't going to forget what happened over those 14 years for a little while. Time is one of the great healers, and it may be that in a few years the Conservative Party might begin to make a recovery. But imagine if I said to you, this is an illustration I've used before, Jonathan, but forgive me for repeating it. Imagine if I said to you, I know when the last car I sold you, the wheels fell off on the motorway and you weren't very pleased with me, but I'd like you to buy another car from me. The first thing you would want to know was, why did the wheels fall off the last one? Why did it go so wrong? And I still don't think the Conservative Party have answered that question. I'm old enough, you're much younger than I am, but I'm old enough to know what the Thatcher Major governments achieved between 79 and 97. And I compare that to what the Conservative governments achieved between, 2010 and 2024. And there's no comparison. And actually, largely what Thatcher and Major said they would do, they did. I'm afraid what Cameron, Boris, May, Truss, Sunak said they would do, particularly on immigration, but also on tax, on environmental policy, on home ownership, they didn't do. And the Conservative Party, they should talk about economic credibility, you're right, it's a small opening for them. But until they answer the fundamental question, why did their period in government go so badly wrong, I don't think people will listen to them very carefully.
Well, I asked Gawain Towle, obviously the former head of press for Reform UK, the same question I'm going to ask you now, which is, isn't it a bit rich for, as you've sort of pointed out already, Conservative, but also Labour, who during the general election told us time and again they had a fully costed plan that would require no tax raises, and yet they get into power, axe winter fuel, break a promise to not introduce inheritance tax on farmers, increase tax on businesses by around £40 billion. Record borrowing now we've seen in April for the fourth highest on record, £20.2 billion. Is there any credibility for even the Labour Party to try and have a swing at Nigel Farage when it comes to being fiscally prudent?
No, but it won't. The swing won't come from the Labour Party. It won't come from the Conservatives particularly. If Reform have a chance to win power at the next election, and I'm fully committed to, I hope to see Nigel Farage in number 10. But if they're going to have a chance, it will be in the circumstances when, first of all, the Conservatives have failed, and then Labour will have failed. And it will be voters, it will be commentators in seats that you're currently occupying. But most importantly, we are sat in London Bridge with the City of London behind the glass, from where we're sitting. And it'll be the City of London and financial markets around the world. They will kick the tyres of a possible reform government. And you will see a situation whereby if reforms start to lead in the opinion polls and the markets do not think that reform's numbers will add up, you'll see a run on the pound. You'll see market turbulence. So reform, I predict they will, but by necessity, they have to make sure their numbers add up. And I think it's unfair to ask for it all to be sort of watertight now, because we have no idea what the public finances will be by the time of the next election. But I don't think they can leave it anywhere close to the next election. Over the next 6 to 12 months, I think they need to show that they are serious about making sure that there isn't another Liz Truss episode. There isn't another Rachel Reeves debacle. There has to be numbers that people from around the world in financial markets can look at and say, don't necessarily agree with their priorities, but at least they add up.
And out of interest, I think it's again quite interesting that actually Nigel only really firmly committed to 5 billion. That's the reversal of the winter fuel and scrapping the two-child cap. He said the 20,000 personal tax-free allowance is a direction of travel. And then he said with the marriage allowance, based on when the economic circumstances present themselves. But again, I suppose it comes back to your earlier point. Is it kind of teasing the voters and making big promises that will likely therefore not be delivered, and therefore fall into the trap that Labour made when they promised big change in 2024, when the Conservatives promised levelling up in 2019? Essentially, is it reform who will undo reform?
That's a very good question. Well, look, I think the bigger promises that reform will make that will move voters are ones I think we're already familiar with. Stopping the boats. It's controlling immigration. That's probably the number one issue for voters at the moment. And then I think net zero has become more and more important. Net zero is crippling the British economy. It explains why we've lost so much of our manufacturing industry. And we haven't improved the environment at the same time. All we've done is we've shipped our manufacturing industry abroad where their environmental standards are actually weaker. So we've lost our manufacturing industry, and there's probably more pollution overall. And I think if we end net zero as well, people will begin to see lower energy bills. We've got the highest energy bills in the world at the moment. Those are the things that I think will make a real difference for voters and are very tangible and aren't going to cost money. But yeah, your general point is the promises will need to be explicitly stated when they will be delivered and when they won't be delivered, because what you do not want is reform government to be elected and people think that they've been misled.
Now, I believe, Tim, you were a co-founder of the Centre for Social Justice. We had Joe Shalom, the Director of Policy, on earlier. How pleased were you here to hear a policy about allowing tax breaks to be passed on between married couples in order to help them with the cost of rearing children? How important has it been to have a party finally stick its neck above the parapet and say family matters and marriage matters?
Well, look, for me, it's one of the most important policy announcements of all. I'm not married. I don't have a partner at the moment, but for me, the institution of marriage, I've seen my parents. They've been married for over 50 years now, and it's been the rock upon which a lot of my nephew, the care he gets from his grandparents is an extraordinary thing. Again and again, I see the married family at the centre of so much social good. Now, of course, we all know people who aren't married where it works, but the overwhelming evidence is that when you don't have marriage, when you don't have why is marriage different from other forms of relationships? I would say one of the reasons is when you get married, you invite all your friends, all your extended family to come to the ceremony, and they invest in your relationship. The important institution isn't the nuclear family, it's the extended family. And so marriage matters. Marriage makes a difference to the people that get involved in it. And as Nigel Farage said today, we all know circumstances when it doesn't work. It hasn't always worked for him. So we're not judging people and saying, you've got to live in marriage. But if we can promote marriage, if we can help marriages to work, I think it's a very good thing.
And final one before we go to the break. Do you think that this will cause a change in the Westminster conversation, that maybe finally Labour and Conservative will also put forward some proposals? Why do you think that people have shied away from this kind of conversation for so long? Something which the Centre for Social Justice has never been scared to have a conversation. The only think tank really with the brains and the brawn to say so.
Well, I think it was Boris Johnson. I remember a conversation once with him. I hope I'm not sort of betraying confidences. I think he would probably say, I don't do a very good Boris impersonation. You probably do a better one, Jonathan.
No, I can assure you it's very bad.
But Boris said, I don't really do family. Well, I do family too much, he sort of said to me. But he was then cautious to promote family because of his own circumstances. And I can kind of understand that. But all of us, as much as most of us can see where good families work, all of us know in our own extended family, we've seen families break up, we've seen marriages break up, we've seen things go wrong. We all know that's the reality of life. But that shouldn't stop us from saying, even though it goes wrong very often, marriage and the family still matters, and we should try and help support it when we can. So I think in the past, political parties have felt unwilling to go there because they're afraid of, the fact that they have fragility perhaps in their own circumstances. But we all have fragility in our own circumstances. You can still, like most single parents, they still want for their own children them not to be single parents. So even when there is sort of a movement away from the ideal, in inverted commas, you can still support the ideal.
Well, thank you, Tim. And if you want to tell us what you think about the importance of marriage and family, call in 0344 499 1000, text in the word talk, start your message to 87222, or follow us on X at talkTV. And then also make sure you do that if you want to hear more Boris Johnson impressions from Tim Montgomery. We'll see you shortly.
Aspirational, I suppose, rather than a prophecy. I'm not trying to say that I definitely know for sure. I'm suggesting or making the argument that so many major things have happened that the woke movement as we've known it is coming to an end. There's too many things. There's the Supreme Court ruling saying that biological sex in the Equality Act means biological sex. There's the Cass review, which led to the puberty blockers being banned. We've had DEI being stripped out of major corporations across the world. The election of Trump and him saying, with these executive orders regarding no more men in women's prisons, no more men in women's sports.
It's unusual.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back here, the home of Common Sense on Talk with me, Jonathan Gullis, sitting in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan on the political assignment. In the studio, political commentator and Reform UK supporter Tim Montgomery. Tim, next story that we want to get onto is we've seen polls saying that Reform have got big leads. Find Out Now today said Reform's got an 11-point lead over Labour. But then YouGov kind of dropped this one that sort of has really stirred the pot, really, which says that allegedly Nigel Farage is the least popular of any leader. So, for example, suggests that Keir Starmer versus Nigel Farage, so Keir Starmer's a 15-point lead. Nigel Farage versus Ed Davey. Ed Davey has a 14-point lead. And even Kemi Badenoch has a 4-point lead over Nigel Farage. Is Nigel the reason Reform might not succeed? Is he the problem for Reform UK? And is this why Labour is so desperate to make Reform the opposition? Because they believe they'll be able to spook enough voters to back them to block Nigel from number 10.
Well, look, my own theory is Nigel Farage is Marmite. He's Marmite for people. He's our biggest asset as a party, but there are also a lot of people who don't like him. And so a lot of polls will find he's the preferred person to be Prime Minister. But then, as you say, these head-to-heads show that actually there's some way for Reform to go. And you know what? I don't think this is that bad for Reform to hear that. There's quite a bit of exuberance about Reform at the moment. And actually, I know from all my political instincts, is that Reform have a lot of work still to do. And you know Nigel a little bit,
Yep.
Jonathan. When I'm privileged to speak to Nigel quite often, and he will ring me sometimes after a busy day, and he'll say, "How did that go? Did I get that right?" He's a more reflective person,
Yeah.
and a person more self-examining of his conduct, and willing in private much more to admit that he's got mistakes than I think the public figure looks like. And I think it's not easy because the media is quite hostile to him.
Yes.
talkTV is an honourable exception. It gives him a much fairer ride. But a lot of the media is very hostile, won't even listen to what he's got to say. And I think it's made him sort of slightly defensive. And I think we need to see more of the real Nigel Farage, who is a more thoughtful and more reflective, more generous, more compassionate person than the caricature. And so those findings, I think, are probably real at the moment in that YouGov survey that you've just outlined. But I don't think they are fair to Nigel Farage in what he could be.
Well,
over
I
the
agree
next
with you,
2 or 3
Tim.
years, we need to see the real, slightly softer Nigel Farage than the one of public caricature.
So I'm lucky to have spent time with Nigel before the election and since in a private capacity, and can only say how lovely, kind and personable he is. And in fact, the Conservative Party will learn a lot of lessons. He has made more outreach just to even check how I am, despite what some might rumour. He's not actually asked once about, will you come over? Just generally, how are you doing? What do you think of this? What's your views on that? Than I've heard from any Conservative Member of Parliament that I used to serve with, or indeed is still elected. And I think that says a lot about an individual at the end of the day. And so he obviously comes up, and I find it again, Labour like to throw the personal drive. He's not a working man, he's from Dulwich College, but Sir Keir Starmer, this great tool maker that his father was. But at the same time, we also see that reports come out today that despite the promise from Labour to not increase income tax, to not increase national insurance or VAT, the National Institute of Economic and Social Research has suggested that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves are going to have to find between 10 and 30 billion pounds in tax rises just to keep the books balanced. Rachel Reeves only left herself in that spring statement 9.9 billion to the decimal point perfect, which had a lot of suspicion. But since then, been hit by tariffs worth 4.4 billion. Going to U-turn on winter fuel, 1.5 billion. Two-child cap, we know they're going to U-turn. That would be 3.5 billion. And then 2 billion more than was budgeted in union pay deals. That's 11.4 billion. So there goes her headroom. Has Labour lost total fiscal credibility? And has Keir Starmer undermined Rachel Reeves so much that she is simply on the clock for when she'll have to leave at number 11?
It's an extraordinary fall, isn't it? Extraordinary descent. She was supposed to be not only the first female Chancellor less than a year ago, but one of the dominant figures in this government. And then we had last week the Angela Rayner leak, whereby Angela Rayner was essentially, or her people, let's just say her people. I'm sure Angela Rayner had nothing at all to do with the leak. But basically, Team Rayner leaked really a full onslaught to the Chancellor's strategy, saying we shouldn't be making more cuts, we should be raising taxes on the middle classes, adding to the one, Jonathan, that you've already just set out for us. And on the podcast I do with my own podcast, you mentioned your own podcast, my own podcast with Steve Richards, who's better connected with Labour than I am. He now thinks that a majority of the cabinet oppose the Chancellor's strategy.
Wow.
And so I think you're going to potentially see quite a lot of civil war in Labour as the spending round gets closer. And so I think Rachel Reeves is in a lot of trouble.
Do you think that she is the one who has to deliver more bad news in the autumn, and then essentially Keir Starmer hopes that she'll take the can when she's asked probably to resign rather than be sacked, so she can leave on her own terms and try and make
she'll
it...
be the fall guy,
She'll be the fall guy for it. Well,
it's almost as if you've been in politics and know how it works.
Yeah, I know, it's sad, isn't it, to see? I mean, does it amaze you, the U-turn on winter fuel? Because ultimately, Labour MPs have been marched up the hill, and you'll know this, what happens. Marched up the hill, there'll be letters, there'll be statements and social media, there'll be things they send the House of Commons to come out in hearted defence of the government. And now they're going to have to write to those very same constituents and say the complete opposite.
Yeah.
Do you think, classic with MPs, the moment they realise their seats are up, they're a goner, they're in big trouble? Because for next year, there's 2,200 Labour councillors up for election in places like Manchester, Bury, Rotherham, Tameside, as well as in the London boroughs, which obviously for Bexley and Bromley, Reform UK I'm sure will be looking at, and then of course in Birmingham, where I'm sure Reform UK look to do well too. Do you think Labour MPs are going to start questioning Keir Starmer as the guy whether or not he can continue, because ultimately I've seen his negative poll ratings. I think if they lose over 1,000 councillors and don't win the mayor in Cheshire and don't win the mayor in Essex, both elections we're expecting next May, that Sir Keir Starmer might end up realising he's the problem for Labour, and the West Streeting might be the one who can save it for them.
West Streeting, though, the thing about West Streeting, he only has a majority of 500, doesn't he, now?
Yes.
So it's hard for him. I think it's hard for you to become Labour leader when you've got basically your target on your back. But I'm slightly worried, Jonathan, at what you just said, because we want Keir Starmer in place. Do we need to mount a Save Keir Starmer campaign? Because he's been a terrible Prime Minister, hasn't he? You know, the drop in his support in less than a year. His ratings are now lower than Rishi Sunak's.
It's the biggest fall for any government, and for a leader in 40 years. He's as unpopular as Gordon Brown in 2009 post the global financial crash, and as unpopular in the months leading up to Jeremy Corbyn's 2019 electoral defeat. Yeah.
Now, of course, if he was Tory leader, he'd probably been gone already. You know what the Tory party's like, they get rid of the leader. But in Labour, it's much more difficult. It's much more difficult because of the way they organise themselves, but they're a much more loyal party than the Conservatives. And also, I think there is a question of who would be better. So I've said West Streeting, the trouble with him is he's got a small majority. Angela Rayner certainly has a lot of support amongst sort of working class Labour, but would she command confidence of the whole government? You know, she hasn't exactly done very well yet with her house building programme. So her workers' bill sort of legislation is going to do a lot of damage to the economy. So is she a good hope for Labour? I'm not entirely sure if you got rid of Keir Starmer, who you'd put in his place that would improve Labour's position. If I had to recommend, this is an honest recommendation, I think Peter Kyle is quite impressive. I don't know what you think about him.
I'm not as impressed by Peter Kyle.
Oh,
I think
really?
he can read a line, but I don't think he would have any ability to connect with the public.
No.
I was a PPS to Brandon Lewis when he was Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, and Peter Kyle was the opposite. And maybe it's just because things got personal sometimes between me and Peter in the chamber.
Right.
Maybe I'm being unfair. But look, there's one person, as we keep hearing, obviously, as we said with Boris Johnson, you kind of broke the news that Boris was looking at coming back, and his team was certainly messaging around. Since then, it's all anyone's talking about, and Kemi Badenoch must be desperately now looking over his shoulder even more when she thought Robert Jenrick was already standing there.
Looking over both shoulders.
Looking over both shoulders now. Now, we've got senior figures in the Conservative Party saying there's, quote, no appetite for Boris Johnson's return, and a shadow cabinet minister, no one's put their name to it, saying that they could not think of, quote, a single one of their colleagues who thought Mr Johnson returning to the Conservative Party would be a good thing. Do you think Reform UK should fear Boris Johnson return?
I don't. I like Boris a great deal in the past, and he's been kind to me in lots of ways. Again, you know, he's more interesting private figure than he is publicly, but I'm afraid I was hugely disappointed as his time as Prime Minister. Immigration went up. You know, 2 million people came into Britain in those 2 or 3 years after the Brexit vote. Complete contradiction to what was said. Taxes rose. He was passionate about the net zero agenda, which has caused so much of our manufacturing industry to be lost. That explains why pensioners struggle to heat their homes. He abandoned the house building legislation that would have given young people affordable homes. So, on all the issues that I think Conservatives and people of the centre right would value, Boris Johnson took Britain in the wrong direction. So he had his chance. I'm afraid he failed.
Well, there you go. Thank you, Tim Montgomery, for joining us in the studio today. Do you think Boris Johnson should return to frontline politics? Should he lead the Conservative Party in the next general election? Would you vote for Boris Johnson over Nigel Farage? And do you think that Nigel Farage has done a good thing with the 2-child benefit cap? Is it time to have a more family-friendly policy? Make sure you call in 0344 499 1000. Text in the word TALK to the start of your message to 87222, or follow us on X at talkTV, and we'll see you soon after this break.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. Here's the Political Asylum with me, Jonathan Gullis, sitting in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan on the home of common sense, that is Talk. What a great first hour we have had, but obviously lots of reform guests on there. Now let's get the view from the opposition. Let's introduce our next guest, Kevin Hollinrake, Conservative Member of Parliament and the Shadow Secretary of State for Communities, Housing and Local Government, and a former colleague of mine. Kevin, hi, how are you?
Evening, Jonathan. Very well, thanks. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And look, thank you for coming on. And I know it was a short notice as well after a colleague had to drop out, and I appreciate that immensely. First of all, we can't avoid it. Nigel Farage has obviously come out saying that he would scrap the two-child benefit cap. He'd fully reintroduce the winter fuel payment to all eligible pensioners. And he would obviously want to see the £20,000 tax threshold for the personal allowance come in, as he says, when the economic circumstances are correct. Is this something that you fear in the Conservative Party? Does this show Nigel Farage is able to win both left and right? Or is this economic uncredibility, as Tim Montgomery was saying earlier, and going to be the Achilles heel for Reform UK?
I think the latter. I mean, your station is the home of common sense, Jonathan, as you said. And it's common sense that when you make spending pledges, you actually fund those pledges. And there's so many of those things you just mentioned that are completely unfunded and are really significant amounts of spending. I mean, the two-child limit on tax credits, this is our universal credit, is about £4 billion a year. And Nigel Farage said today, when questioned by the journalists there today after he'd made his speech, that the numbers don't add up. So the people listening to your show are people who have to make ends meet, have to balance the books, whether it be their households or their businesses, and that's just not what's happening at Reform.
And with this commitment, is this something that you can say the Conservative Party firmly rules out? They would not lift the two-child cap benefit. That would remain in place?
Yes, absolutely. We're clear on that, is that having children is a choice, and the people make those choices on the basis there is a limit to what the taxpayer can fund. That's very clear. The winter fuel allowance, of course, is a completely different thing. You don't have a choice about getting old, and it's a privilege to do so, the fact we're living longer these days. So we think that should be reinstated. It was a terrible policy implemented by a terrible Chancellor and a terrible Prime Minister, and we said we'll reverse that. But you can't simply continually add to the benefits bill and just keep sending the bill to the taxpayer. That's what's happening. And Nigel Farage is always talking about trying to get taxes low, as we are too. But you can't keep adding to the benefits bill and still reduce taxes. It's just not possible.
With the winter fuel there, Kevin, are you saying that you would fully reinstate it? You think that it should go back to all pensioners, or would you want to see some level of means testing?
Well, our position is clear. We voted against the withdrawal of the winter fuel allowance, and that means it goes back to everybody. So yes, is the short answer. It goes back to everybody. I think there is definitely an argument in a properly thought through policy how you could bring in a means testing at a much higher level. Of course, famously the millionaires are getting winter fuel allowance, and we don't think that's right. But that's difficult to do right now. The way we calculate income is not at a household level, so it's very difficult to say to a household you should be getting it and you shouldn't. That should be work in progress, and that's not to say there wouldn't be adjustments to that down the line. But at the moment, the cut-off is £11,500. And even below that figure, you still have to fill in a lot of forms, a 20-page form, to get pension credit, which then gives you access to winter fuel allowance. We think that is terrible policy. 20-odd thousand of my constituents are affected by the withdrawal of that, most of whom are on very low incomes. So it's simply wrong. It was done in haste. You've got to make this change quickly, and crucially, you've got to make this change before this winter. And there should be a full apology for what Labour's done, because they put a lot of people through some hardship over the last winter. It's got to be reinstated before next winter. Now,
you say the policy of the two-child cap is about £4 billion, others say about £3.5 billion, but let's go in between those figures. What would the Conservative Party do with £3.5 to £4 billion to help children in poverty? Because ultimately Reform would say that by reversing the two-child cap, it's estimated 500,000 children could be immediately lifted out of poverty. How would you tackle child poverty?
Well, that's the point, though, John. We haven't got £3.5 billion. This is extra spending. It's not like you saved anything. You know, if you commit to abolishing the two-child cap, you've got to find £3.5–4 billion, whatever that number is. It's a lot of money. You want the best way to take people out of poverty? You know what that is, Jonathan. I think most people at home know what that is, and that's get people in work and more work and better paid work. And we suffered criticism as a party, but for lifting that, introducing the national living wage and lifting it to record levels, and that's where it's gone to. So lots more people are living a better life because of that. And also we lifted the tax threshold to about £12,000. So you're paying less tax now on those low incomes. That's the best way to get children out of poverty and adults out of poverty. Better paid work, more work, better paid work, lower taxation. That's what we've always committed to, that direction of travel.
But Kevin, we say that, but actually since 2010, we didn't see wages really significantly increase over the course of the Conservative government. If you look at places like I live in Stoke-on-Trent, we didn't see high-skilled, high-wage jobs come. We saw more high-skilled jobs in the southeast where it's been two-bedded, but you, as someone who represents a northern community and myself, didn't see that delivery of levelling up, those new jobs. Why is it that Microsoft won't set up in Stoke-on-Trent where they have, for example, the UK leading video games university in the country? Why is it that we haven't seen other big companies move to other parts of the country? Surely that is a failure of Conservative policy to not spread the wealth, and therefore this child cap benefit is needed to be lifted in order to get children out of poverty through no fault of their own who are stuck in it.
Well, that's just an important point, and you and I both believe in levelling up, and this isn't just about the north, as you referenced. It's the Midlands, it's South West, it's Wales, it's Scotland, it's Northern Ireland, all those kind of places. I think where we got this wrong was that it's the right ambition and right thing to do, and there are huge benefits to individuals and to the nation if we can properly level up this country. What we weren't clear on is the scale of the problem. It will mean it'll take decades for that to happen. That infrastructure investment takes time. So the economic disparity, if you look at the output, the general productivity per capita in your region or in the northeast of England, and the gap between that and London in relative terms is as wide as it was between East and West Germany prior to reunification. And that took 30 years and $2 trillion. So levelling up is absolutely the right thing to do. It just will take more time.
But is that therefore a failure of Conservatism, Kevin? Is that a failure on the Conservatives? Should we be the ones saying sorry for allowing that situation to occur?
Well, I think for not being clear, yeah, of course, I have to say sorry all the time for various stuff, John. We got wrong immigration, we got that wrong. I mean, for not being clear that levelling up would take more than a parliament, I think we should have been clearer on that. It wasn't a few bit of levelling up funds, it was a strategic, decades-long investment, but it's still the right thing to do.
But as you say, the investment takes decades potentially to bring in. So wouldn't it be appropriate to help those families immediately now by finding that £3.5–4 billion to lift those children out of poverty, to remove that child cap and make sure that families is something that's seen as a positive thing when we have a declining birth rate and an ageing population?
Well, I don't agree with that. You may put that forward as a policy. I think benefits bill is high enough because it links directly to the tax bill people pay. So I'd rather, there's no doubt, if you've seen actually in recent months, you are seeing now real wages increasing above inflation. But the reason real wages haven't increased, there were specific factors around Brexit, around COVID, around the cost of living crisis, one thing after another that hit those real wages. We are seeing that real wages increase now. So there are some benefits to this policy. One thing we got, again, we didn't get right, and we got many things right. I could list them all for you, but you know them all anyway. But the one thing we got drastically wrong was when we could control migration. Finally, in 2022, we got the rules wrong, and immigration has been too high for too long, which has affected the real wages of working people. We absolutely got that wrong. The net migration figures need to be a lot lower. We need to see that business investment in our economy. That will lead to better jobs, better wages. That's the way to get people out of poverty.
But do you know what my frustration is, Kevin? As a Conservative Party member, I was looking for the Conservatives to put forward what would they do? What would they do as an alternative? And what I find frustrating is that still we're not seeing anything. Is Kemi going to have to simply stop the long-awaited policy renewal programme and have to start putting ideas on the table? Otherwise, Nigel Farage is going to suck up all the oxygen.
Okay, well, I'll give you a choice, John. You choose which one you want. We can have an approach where sometimes happened in the past where we simply rush out a policy without costing it properly, without finding out where you're going to get the money from. That's what Nigel Farage has done today and in their manifesto at the last election. Or you can take your time. I don't mean years, I mean a few more weeks and months to make sure what we pledge to do we can afford, and then those policies will come out. I think you'll see a lot of those policies coming out by October this year, which will be our party conference. But there's policies already out there. You've been watching the deportation bill, which is the repatriation of every foreign national offender who's in this country, about having indefinite leave to remain, not 5 years, but 15 years, having a Rwanda policy again to deter those small boat crossings, to disapply human rights law, which is effectively the European Convention on Human Rights, from immigration law, so we can do this. Policies are out there already, and you are seeing these things coming through. What you will see from Kemi, in my view, she's a true Conservative, she's strong, she's courageous. Those policies will come out with proper Conservative policies, and they will be implemented, because that was always my experience with Kemi, working for her in the Department of Business and Trade.
Do you know what my frustration is, Kevin? That deportation bill, for example, is something that I was certainly pushing for when I was part of that New Conservatives group with Danny Kruger, Miriam Cates and others. Those type of policies were what we were pushing. Now, there are colleagues on your benches, not you and not Kemi, I'll make that abundantly clear. You were both common sense, sensible Conservatives. But there are many other of your colleagues who rallied against those bits of legislation, those ideas, would say lots of things behind closed doors. In fact, some were briefing to newspapers that people like me were fascists for even having those views. How can I, having seen what went on with some of those colleagues, but more importantly, how can the country truly believe that if you were in government, you would deliver on that type of legislation?
Well, I can understand the frustration you had and many of us had. And I think as a party at one point, we tried to be all things to all people. But you can't do that in politics. You know, you've got to nail your colours to the mast. And I don't think we did. And I think some of the policies, particularly on immigration, were wrong. I can point to many things we got right on the economy, on education, on crime, on business, on employment, all those kind of things. But we certainly got it wrong on immigration. It is not right to say that if you want to moderate immigration, if you want to stop the small boats crossings, you're somehow a racist. That is complete nonsense. It's perfectly in order that we want to control migration, control our own borders. In fact, it's essential that we do. And that policy, those policies you see coming down the track from Kemi, people will like and will think we've finally regained our senses when it comes to this particular policy area.
Now, Kevin, you must be sitting there scratching your head. You obviously have a financial background, if I'm not mistaken, or you certainly know the world of finance. You always seem to
be
business and finance very well. You must be scratching your head when you see what's going on with Rachel Reeves. We've got here the National Institute of Economic and Social Research saying that they reckon Rachel Reeves is going to have to raise taxes to bring in 10 to 30 billion pounds in order to bail her out of the situation, despite the fact that Labour promised to not increase income tax, not increase national insurance and not increase VAT. We know that she managed to the decimal point, bizarrely managed to create the same £9.9 billion headroom in the spring statement, but the tariffs are expected to cost 4.4 billion. Winter fuel U-turn will be 1.5 billion. The two-child cap, which we expect Labour will probably U-turn on 3.5 billion, and 2 billion more on pay deals for public sector workers on top of the 9.5 billion they gave the year before. This is going to be 11.4 billion. So her fiscal headroom has gone. Borrowing at a record high in April, £20.2 billion, the fourth highest on record. Sir Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves' personal poll ratings through the floor. Do you think Rachel Reeves can survive any longer, or do you think this Labour government can survive any longer? Because surely the markets and businesses are saying, you've increased tax on us through national insurance, you've screwed over pensioners, you've screwed over farmers, and I know you represent a farming community, you're now screwing over the fishermen too. No one's going to believe a word they're going to say in the business or financial world, are they?
Well, I think that's exactly right. I mean, she's made the business sector very nervous, because the first thing she did is talk the economy down for 6 months, which damages confidence, then hit it with business with £25 billion of tax increases and consumers with another 15 billion. And now talk about all this red tape coming down the track. So businesses have lost confidence. The confidence measure for business was +5 when they took over. It's now about minus 60, according to the Institute of Directors. But all this is bad for investment. And I think, will Rachel Reeves survive? Well, I think her and Keir Starmer are clinging on to each other for dear life because they're both massively in trouble. So I think she probably will, because I think if she goes, Keir Starmer will be next. But I think you're right. I mean, what's coming down the track? We know this is all, the pitch is being rolled right now, isn't it? As it was before the October budget. And this year, we're going to see more tax increases after saying she wouldn't. Again, so many broken promises. And the worst thing is, two things. The money will be wasted because when they give high pay increases, they don't no strings attached in terms of productivity, which is foolish, but also they won't work. You keep sticking up taxes on the wealthy, which is what they'll have to do. The wealthy will just say, thanks very much, we'll leave it, we're going elsewhere. That's what will happen. So it's economically illiterate, very bad politically, and very, very damaging for this country.
The final story I've got to tell you is we had Tory MPs allegedly telling Boris Johnson, we don't want you back. Well, allegedly, a shadow cabinet minister, a colleague of yours, has given an anonymous quote saying they could not think of a single one of their colleagues who thought Mr Johnson returning to the Conservative Party fold would be a good thing. Would you like to see Boris Johnson back in Parliament? And if he were, do you think he'd make a good leader again?
Well, Boris has got his friends. That wasn't me who said that. I don't know who said it. I always a bit suspicious of anonymous quotes, whatever potential role they might have. Listen, Boris has his friends. He's loved by many parts of the country and many people in the country, and some people he's not their favourite person. But isn't that politics, Jonathan? Some people like you, some people don't like you. That's the fact. At least, you're always going to have your proponents and your opponents. I have a lot of time for Boris. I don't think he's the leader to take us forward. I think we've got a very good leader in Kemi. As if she's too conservative, so will her policies be. And crucially, she's courageous, and she'll make sure those policies are implemented.
Are you concerned, though, by the polling showing regularly 17 to 19%, and obviously 670 councillors being lost in the local elections recently in May? Do you think it's just about Conservative MPs, but most importantly members, holding their nerve?
I am very concerned about that, of course, but it is about holding the nerve. That's crucial. I mean, where we are in the polls and where we were at the local election results, it was a measure of where we've been, not where we're going. And I think so it's understandable those results were very poor for us, and they were. But I think people over the next coming months and then coming years, people will see that change, because I think the more those policies come out that you're desperate for, you're very impatient for, and so am I think more that people will realise that Kemi's the real deal. And I think people will like what she's got to say and how she says it. And so I think our fortunes will improve. Well,
Kevin Hollinrake, Conservative Member of Parliament and Shadow Secretary of State for Communities, Housing and Local Government, thank you so much for all your time this evening and for jumping in so late in the day. I really do appreciate it. Tell us, listeners and viewers, what do you think? Do you like what the Conservatives are saying? Do you think they've got a chance back on the road to redemption? Call in 0344 499 1000, texting the word talk of the start of your message to 87222, or follow us on X at talkTV. We'll see you shortly.
police are still at the beginning of their investigation, and what they won't do is release information that they're not sure of. Otherwise, it leads to problems further along the line should there be any criminal or other court proceedings. They've been bitten like that a few times in the past. And so despite the pressure for them to constantly be telling more and more and more, they will only reveal information at the appropriate time when they're satisfied that it is actually correct.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to the Political Asylum with me, Jonathan Gullis, sitting in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan on Talk, the home of common sense. And I'm delighted to be joined by my next guest. His name is Councillor Carl Cashman. He is a Lib Dem councillor on Liverpool City Council. He is also the group leader for the Lib Dems on that City Council. And I personally think he's a future star of the Liberal Democrat movement. And I love seeing him speak. And I'm probably just giving him the kiss of death on his political career, but hopefully not. But Carl, delighted to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you, Jonathan, and thank you for those kind words. And can I just say before we start, congratulations. I think I've seen that you became mayor of your local town, which, you know, quite a lot of people don't kind of look up local government, but that's a big kind of responsibility, and well done to you for doing that. I hope you do a good job over the course of the next year.
No, thank you so much. And I'm delighted that one of the charities I'll be supporting is called the Tri Services, which looks after veterans. And they have Operation R&R in Harrisey Head. And we're going to be doing lots there to try and raise money to help them get the equipment to get those veterans. And I know that you're very passionate about similar causes too. Look, Carl, I saw a very moving video yesterday posted on your social media. Of course, you are in Liverpool, and we can't start by not talking about the dreadful scenes we saw last night. And I believe you're a Liverpool fan. You were actually in the city centre, I think, to join others in celebrating the 20th top league title, and then obviously the horror that then unfolded. Obviously, a 53-year-old white British male from the Merseyside area has been arrested. It is believed that that individual was on drugs whilst behind the vehicle, and has also been arrested on dangerous driving and attempted murder at this moment in time. And there is not any evidence, nor is there any investigation underway for anything untoward like terrorism or such like that. But I thought I would just come to you for your thoughts and your reflections on what was meant to be a joyous day and then became a very dark day, and how the city is healing today.
Yeah, well, I think it's a perfect place to start, really. And I mean, I wasn't in the city centre. Actually, yesterday I was at the first part of the parade, which was Queen's Drive, Wavertree. And, you know, from what I seen there, the police were managing the crowd really well. Everyone was as well behaved as you can expect at a parade where you're celebrating, as you say, the first Premier League title that the city is actually seeing, because, you know, as people will know, the last one was during COVID, so we couldn't celebrate it. So there was people who lined the streets from Queen's Drive, Wavertree, right up to the city centre. And initially, I think we had some figures around the 30,000 mark for people that were going to line the streets. I think it was more near 1 million people. There was people from inside the city, outside the city, absolutely everywhere, and it was fantastic. Obviously, kind of to go from that elation to the devastation after hearing what had happened was awful. And for me, it was particularly bad because I was still out in a pub with my dad, and I kind of keep going back to this in my head that, you know, the video that I put on my Instagram before the video, you know, talking about the devastating event, was a video of me and my dad singing "You'll Never Walk Alone" in a pub. And I think just to kind of go from that to then kind of talking about this is devastating and what's happened in the city just exemplifies, you know, the moods. I think I've seen someone say today that kind of the mood went from up here to right down here. And the people of this city, and if you've ever been here, Jonathan, and ever kind of met people from Liverpool, which I'm sure you have, you'll know that the best people and the kindest people in the world. And what's happened since those events has just been fantastic. People from Liverpool offering support, offering accommodation, offering transport to people from within and outside of the city. I think that's kind of the key takeaway for me after the events of last night.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Carl, and thank you for your words yesterday when you were asking for calm and allowing the police the space to do what they need to do. And Liverpool is a beautiful city. In fact, after Stoke-on-Trent, it's the second favourite city that I've been. In fact, it's where I took my wife after we got engaged and had a lovely day out doing the Beatles tour, as well as enjoying a nice meal out. Even though my politics might not always be welcome in the city of Liverpool, I've always found the people to be very, very hospitable and very friendly, and the regeneration has been fantastic around the docks as well. So our thoughts and our prayers go out to you and to the city of Liverpool here from Talk and News UK, and obviously to the victims most importantly, and hoping and wishing them all a speedy recovery. Now, if you don't mind, Carl, if I pivot to politics, which I know is quite a tough one to pivot to, but Nigel Farage has come out saying that he would scrap the 2-child benefit cap. I believe the Liberal Democrats nationally but agree with this. Is it an odd time for you as a Lib Dem to be agreeing with Nigel Farage and Reform UK?
I suppose it is, because I've always positioned us as the opposite to reform. And I've got kind of maybe a little bit of a different feeling about this to perhaps some in my party, and maybe kind of on the progressive wing of politics, to be honest. I personally think that Labour and Keir Starmer have cooked up a perfect atmosphere for reform. I think their rise is down to the fact that people are just looking for some authenticity, because unfortunately in today's politics, we're lacking authenticity, particularly from robot Labour politicians. And unfortunately, people have assigned that authenticity to Nigel Farage. And, I'll admit that while he speaks his mind, he's also a divvy that speaks his mind. And I think that if politicians, my own party, and I would include myself as someone who likes to try and, speak common sense and kind of give liberal common sense perspective, if politicians start to actually be a bit more authentic and a bit more honest with people, I think you would see a lot less from the likes of Nigel Farage. And people in my city, Jonathan, people in this country as well, they want people to be honest. And I don't think Labour understand that. And I think if they continue to kind of disregard that, they'll be wiped out on the right by reform, and they'll be wiped out on the left by the Liberal Democrats.
Well, I was about to say, I'm interested in, obviously, Liverpool is always associated with being a hotbed of Labour support, but obviously the Liberal Democrats under your leadership have made gains in the Liverpool City Council elections in recent times. Do you fear Reform UK sweeping into Liverpool? Could they undo Labour and yourselves, or do you think there will be, or are you going to position yourself as the true opposition to reform, where you feel Labour maybe locally and nationally has vacated the field?
Yeah, I think anyone who knows this city will know that there is a north-south divide in the city, and as we, the Liberal Democrats, set out our policy platform, that's one of the things that we're going to try and bridge the gap between. We need to win in the north of the city, not only because the north of the city deserve councillors that work hard for them, but because, I think there was a statistic that if you get the bus from a southern part of the city to a northern part of the city, there's a certain road that you go down where your life expectancy drops by about 10 to 20 years. And I just think that is a disgusting statistic in this day and age. So that needs to be addressed, and that's what the Liberal Democrats want to address. I think because the north of the city has been left for so long by the Labour Party, that you might end up with the likes of reform creeping in there. So you could end up with a kind of pincer movement of reform in the north of the city, the Liberal Democrats in the south, parts of the north and parts of the centre of the city. And then Labour could be stuck in between that pincer movement. And, some people try and this is kind of from the whole kind of, progressive alliance type of thinking, Jonathan. people think, oh, like you're impure if you're on the left, and you want Labour to be like decimated by someone. And I just think, I despise the politics of reform, but I know what the Labour Party is like in this city. I know what the Labour Party is like in Merseyside. And my job as a Liberal, and my job as a Liberal Democrat, is to stop reform, but it's also to replace the Labour Party in Liverpool.
Out of interest, you must be given heart by the fact that now 2 opinion polls have said that Liberal Democrats are ahead of the Conservatives, now in 3rd place. And actually this poll today says that Ed Davey is more popular than Nigel Farage. 41% of voters would say they want Ed Davey, or only 27% said they would want Nigel Farage. And in fact, Ed Davey's only 2 points behind Sir Keir Starmer. So do you think it's easy for us in the media, easy for us in Westminster to get caught up in the reform bubble? But actually, the Lib Dems made 150 gains in the council elections. I think now you have more councillors than the Conservative Party in England. You're now polling above or level with the Conservatives in many national opinion polls. And Ed Davey seemingly is the only one who actually, on a popularity rating, is able to go toe-to-toe with Sir Keir Starmer. Do you think that actually more attention needs to be given to Liberal Democrats, and the Liberal Democrats are doing a good job of slowly but surely coming up through the centre ground in order to bring the country together and potentially take power?
Yeah, I think you're sounding more and more like a Liberal Democrat the more I speak to you, Jonathan. I think you should have a think about defecting. But I just think I always see myself as a Liberal, someone who sees common sense, and I think like someone like yourself and other people around the country that believe in the centre ground, like the sensible position in politics, also think that. And I do think that sometimes that gets blocked out by the media because they want to see these big statements and these kind of controversial moments, and Nigel Farage is happy to give those moments. But I think the media kind of needs to have a long think about what they're doing here. Particularly, I was in an interview with GB News today, and we were meant to do the interview at one point. They were at Nigel Farage's live press conference, so we said, I'll come back, it's fine, I need to do Sky News. And when I came back, we did a pre-record because they were still speaking about Farage. And I ended up in the pre-record. It's a bit cheeky of me, but I said, and Nigel Farage, the fact that he's kind of the leader of these people that froth at the mouth, at the fact that this person who might maybe in the car in Liverpool might have been a Muslim or someone of a different ethnicity. I think it's disgusting that the likes of GB News want to concentrate on people like that. And I think the Liberal Democrats and other kinds of progressive parties need to step up, as I think we have done, but the media needs to play a fair bat, and I think quite often they're not playing that fair bat, and I think they've got a lot to answer for if we end up with Nigel Farage in number 10.
And how would you... have you got elections next year, Carl, finally? Sorry, is it Liverpool City Council elections next year, or in the future?
No. 2027.
2027.
So I've got 2 years.
And what do you think overall, just finally, of this Labour government? They've come in, and I'm sure that there are many people in Merseyside shocked that a Labour government came in, axed winter fuel payments for pensioners, introduced a family farm tax for farmers that will supply food, some of whom in Merseyside might work in the agricultural sector. Obviously, hike taxes on businesses and business owners who are also working people to the tune of 25 billion, but have kept the 2-child cap benefit, and now some would argue only looking at reversing it in order to try and save their own skin. Yet at the same time, they have been willing to have lots of jet setting all over the world. Keir Starmer seems to spend more time abroad than he does in the UK in the eyes of many people. Rachel Reeves has had the freebies. Bridget Phillipson had 14,000 for a birthday party funded by a donor too. The tickets galore to events as well. Does this for Liverpoolians and for people of Merseyside, who would be seen as the home for Labour, as you say, that would be the assumption. Do you think that this Labour Party could be anything further from what people expect it to be?
They couldn't be further. And if you speak to anyone on the streets of Liverpool now, they'll tell you exactly that. Knocking on doors recently here, there's just a massive backlash against the Labour government. And as you say, you know, the fact that they want to reverse some of these really, really unpopular policies, or, you know, they haven't even committed to it yet, but they might reverse some of them. I think it's purely because they're frightened of, you know, the opposition parties kind of coming in and taking some of their ground. And I think that's an awful way to do politics. You shouldn't do politics because you're afraid of something. You should do politics because you believe in something and because you're hopeful about something. And this Labour government just has been anything but that. And I go back to the point that they've been really, really inauthentic. And I think a moment for me when I realised that they're really in trouble in Liverpool and elsewhere was a guy in West Derby reached out to me and one of our campaigners, Phil, and he's disabled in a wheelchair. And initially, you know, it was one of our kind of local campaigns, you know, as the Lib Dems do, about some pavement parking and how it makes it difficult for people in wheelchairs. But then also obviously mentioned about Labour's disability cuts. And he said he's been a Labour voter all his life, 50 odd years. He said he'll never vote for them again. They're not acting like a Labour government, you know, they're not acting like a progressive political party. I just think they've got no moral compass in government at the moment, and it's a real shame because I think people were crying out for a little bit of change.
Well, look, Carl, thank you so much for joining us today. Councillor Carl Cashman, Liberal Democrat on Liverpool City Council and the leader of the Liberal Democrats. What do you think? We've had a Lib Dem voice, we've had a Conservative voice, and we've had a Reform voice. Call in 0344 499 1000. Text in with the word talk to the start of your message to 87222 and follow us on X at talkTV.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back here to the home of common sense. That is Talk with me, Jonathan Gullis, sitting in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan on the political asylum. What a show we've had so far today. Lots of you calling and texting in. And let's get to our first caller for today, which is Danny from London. Farage, all his promises, how on earth is he going to fund it? Danny, what do you say?
Well, also, when he comes in maybe 3.5, 4 years' time, this country under Labour is going to be near enough bankrupt. We're going to owe trillions and trillions of pounds. Now, he's also saying that he's going to raise the income tax threshold to £20,000 a person. Am I correct?
Yes, he has. He said he's today, they've changed it, Danny, to say it's an ambition.
An ambition. But all the others, he's not telling us how he's going to pay for it. And he's going to say he's going to... I mean, I love him. Don't worry. I love reform, and I hope they get in. He's going to throw all the migrants out of hotels. Well, where are they going to go? Where are they going to go, the migrants? Where's he going to put them?
Well, it's interesting you say that, Danny, because Tim Montgomery was saying that he really feared that reform could essentially undo reform by not providing the figures, the statistics, and of course the detailed policy. Is it, as someone, as you say, who is reform sympathetic, are you fearful of that too, that this will undermine them and therefore be their downfall?
He's just making promises. I mean, we all want... Well, everything he's saying, the whole country wants, and he knows that. But he's not telling us how he's going to pay it. And as I said before, in 3 years' time, this country is going to be near enough bankrupt. So he's not going to have the money to play with, is he?
What would you like to... Do you agree with his scrapping of the two-child benefit cap? Are you comfortable with that?
No, I think it should stay the two-child benefit cap. I think it should stay. Myself.
And that's interesting. And does that therefore make you question your potential support for Reform UK, or are you still willing to give him the benefit of the doubt for now?
No, obviously you can't agree with him on everything he says, but if you have more children, you should be able to pay for the children. That's why should a taxpayer pay for more children? That's my own belief on it. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm not wrong.
Well, look, thank you, Danny, for calling in. A great call indeed. There you go. You can hear the frustration in Reform supporters' voices. They want to believe in Nigel. They want him to deliver, but they're also fearful that maybe he'll overpromise and underdeliver. Let's have a look at some of the texts. We've got Sue Healy here. Hi, Jonathan. As a lifelong Conservative, I started losing patience with them several years ago when they drifted towards the centre ground of politics. My trust in them has slowly but surely eroded. Reform does deserve a chance now. Let's see what they can do. That's Sue from West Sussex. Another one here from Leslie. Jonathan, my message to Nigel Farage is to get his house in order before he starts encouraging people to have more true children. What a ludicrous idea when all he's doing is encouraging all the wrong people to drive the breeding machine. For this reason, I will not be renewing my Reform membership. So there is a lot of discontent here coming in on the text. That's, as I say, Leslie there. We've got Joanna from Salisbury. Hi, Jonathan. Kevin Hollenrake is missing facts. Raising the limits for paying tax actually pays for itself. People pay less tax, but families claim fewer benefits, which are now paid for by taxes. People are encouraged to earn more if they pay less taxes on lower limits and work more hours. Thus, they're more productive. More money is in the economy, thus creating more jobs. Child benefit with the tax reforms are an incentive, but I think nursery childcare will encourage people to have children because it's so expensive and in some places non-existent. That's Joanna there. Another one, Jonathan, stop the migrants. Then there's £2.8 billion in savings from Martin. And then Polly here, thank God, someone who can do the arithmetic. Well said, Mr. Hollenrake, concerning Reform. Wow. A lot of people saying and suggesting that Reform may have pivoted in the wrong direction on this two-child benefit cap. A lot of concern about how Reform is going to pay for it. You tell us what you think. Call in 0344 499 1000. Text in the word talk to start your message to 87222 or follow us on X at talkTV. We'll see you shortly.
The police are still at the beginning of their investigation, and what they won't do is release information that they're not sure of. Otherwise, it leads to problems further along the line should there be any criminal or other court proceedings. They've been bitten like that a few times in the past. And so despite the pressure for them to constantly be telling more and more and more, they will only reveal information at the appropriate time when they're satisfied that it is actually correct.
the UK. On DAB+. On your smart speaker. On your smart TV. And on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back here to the home of common sense, that is Talk, and it's with me, Jonathan Gullis, stepping in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan on tonight's Political Asylum. And again, great calls, great guests, and great text messages. But look, let's get to our next guest. We've got Philip Caselli here from the New Culture Forum, coming to an amazing story where it says almost half of white men are self-censoring at work for fear of causing offence, a poll has found. Research by JL Partners also found almost a quarter of them, 23%, believe they experienced discrimination because of their race or gender, and some 41% said they worried they would be sacked if they said the wrong thing, while the third, 34%, believed white men were the least valued employees in their workplace. That's a survey of 823 white males conducted for a 5-part podcast and YouTube series called White Men Can't Work. Hi, how are you, Philip?
Hi, Jonathan. It's really nice to see you. I'm great, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And I suppose, what's your take on this? Is this just the inevitable at the end of the day, where we've created a culture that I fear, which is so about sort of talking men down, that all men are somehow predators, all men are misogynists, and actually has led people into the arms of idiots like Andrew Tate?
Yeah, I think I spent quite a lot of time in Manchester and Westminster, two very different places. But one of the things that really kind of binds them together are all the homeless people on the streets. And the vast majority of those homeless people on the streets actually look like me and you, Jonathan. They're white, they're male, they're kind of, I'm older than you, but you know what I mean? They're kind of in between our ages. They're often working class as well. Okay, so these people are kind of forgotten. It comes as no shock whatsoever, does it, to see that men in the workplace are also being marginalised and victimised as well. And who are they being victimised by? The do-gooders, the Be Kind Brigade. I worked in the academic sector for 25 years, and anybody who's worked in the institutions, anybody who's worked in, in all of those kind of things, you just understand this straight away because you immediately are a second-class citizen. And let's be clear here, we're talking about white men. These are people who are bound to most probably be depressed. They are not going to do very well in education. These are the stats, okay? They're often going to be homeless, and these are the people who are most likely going to kill themselves. They don't have the kind of victim safety net that other groups have, because the other groups define themselves in relation to white men. So there's something really sinister going on here. These people are being victimized. We, in a way, are being victimized. But nobody will do anything about it, because it's almost a kind of a symbol in a way, isn't it? A sacrifice. This was what society was. And we've changed. They're there. They're out on the streets. We're victimizing them at work. We're doing all of that kind of thing. We have changed. And it's really sad that that's happening. And we desperately do actually need to do something about it.
What do you think's led to this culture? Why is it that men have been, particularly white men, been so demonised for so long? Who is to blame here? Is it the media? Is it our sort of our TV dramas that we watch? Is it certain politicians who have been talking for so long about feminism but not acknowledging that there are many good men out there, that you can't taint an entire group because of a few rotten eggs? Or is it simply a case of just a poor education system that has bowed down to what I would call the woke agenda and allowed this DEI agenda to reign rampant across our public sector?
Yeah, well, obviously, it's a combination of all of those things, and I think the DEI thing is massively important. Also, we are victims of the activist agenda, aren't we? So there's been this spasm of activism over the last 10 years or so, and you can see how this stuff has just developed. So you can map it. It starts with Me Too, and then it goes on to BLM, and then everybody's locked down, and everybody goes crazy, and then it's trans, then it's the environment, and now it's Hamas, for God's sake. But all of those things have several things in common. They're not about the things they're ostensibly about. They're actually about the patriarchy. They're about capitalism. They're about anti-Western. They're about anti-Britishness. And part of all of those things, at the centre of that, is men and white men and dead white men and all of those things. So we can't escape it in a way. It's just wherever you go and all of the usual suspects. I mean, I remember being in a university a good few years ago and wearing a suit, a very sharp suit, I have to say, and someone said, oh God, another man in a suit. And this person was actually dressed like a clown. She had blue hair and a rainbow-coloured jersey on. She literally looked like a clown. Other instances, I could give you this chapter and verse all day, Jonathan. Other instances where someone was at a lecture theatre just speaking to a group of people and just routinely said pale, male, and stale to several kind of male students and lots of colleagues there as well. So if I would have said something like that about women, imagine what would have happened then. I would have been frog marched out of the institution the same day. So it's about different standards, and we are the one group that people can attack. People feel safe in attacking, and people coalesce together in relation or against us.
I find it really odd that this happens because, as you say, that we know, for example, there are biological differences between men and women, not just in terms of physically, but also mentally in certain things that men feel. And this push forever, men having to always be willing to cry on cue or to not be masculine or to not try and shoulder the burden sometimes. Surely these are positive traits as well. It doesn't have to mean you can't be there and be supportive or encourage people to show emotion when they don't want them to. But why are we trying to why is so much of society wanting to demasculate men? Why is masculinity seen as a bad thing? We need masculinity for society to work and to thrive. And I get so sick and tired when I hear about, oh, well, we need to have more women into bricklaying or more women in engineering. There's nothing stopping women. There's nothing stopping women doing it. But the reality is that overwhelmingly men are doing it. So why demonise and punish men who want to go into those trades and have all the barriers towards them trying to get there because you want to tick some diversity, equality and inclusivity agenda?
Yeah, I mean, most women don't want to go into those kinds of trades because they're not glamorous. I mean, people want equality, of course, but they especially want equality in glamorous professions. So that all of that stuff doesn't really kind of matter to them. I mean, the problem for me is that men, young boys in particular, are under so much huge pressure. They are just marginalised in every single way. They are made poisonous because of the colour of their skin, for example. Their masculinity. If there's one thing we really need, it's role models. It's male role models. It's fathers. We want good fathers to stay in the home. All of this is about traditional masculinity. And sometimes it's really good not to be emotionally incontinent. To be the person in the room who isn't emotionally incontinent could be a really good thing. And sometimes it's very good to be unemotional and logical and all of those things. We need all of those things. We need a complement to femininity. We don't need just femininity all over the place because we know that doesn't work. We need men to be men and women to be women. I suppose one of the interesting things, if you think about the big development of the trans agenda over the last 10 years or so. That didn't exist 20 or 30 years ago. It literally didn't exist. There were transvestites, which were men who wanted to dress up as women, but there wasn't this inner gendered soul of I feel feminine today, so therefore I am a woman and you must actually call me a woman. This is about the demonization of masculinity, and in a way you can't blame a generation of men who think, well, if I'm a man, all I'm going to get is a load of grief. Everyone's going to hate me. I'm going to get no opportunities. I might as well identify as a woman and get on. You know what I mean? Now, I'm not saying that's good, but I'm saying that's one of the reasons why these things are happening. And what we need to do is we need to stop that kind of disintegration of culture, disintegration of identities, and bring things back on a kind of even playing field where we understand who and what we are and we deal with reality. And the reality is that masculinity by and large, for the most part, is good, is a good force in society. And it's particularly good for young boys, because boys desperately need positive role models as fathers.
Well, I think the positive role models point is superb and leads me on to my final question, which is, look, there's always a lot of talk about Andrew Tate and the types being, at this moment, sort of a beacon for particularly white working class boys who are feeling very overlooked, and understandably so, by the way. How do you think we tackle the Andrew Tates? How do we drive young boys back into the arms of good male positive role models?
Yeah, by bigging up masculinity, as I've just said, and looking for other particular role models. I'm thinking of, there are so many other role models online and in real life, and I'm thinking about people like Jordan Peterson, for example, who absolutely and totally pushes the idea of responsibility, personal responsibility first and foremost. I'm thinking about people like Douglas Murray. I'm thinking about my very good friend Peter Whittle. All of those kinds of people. This is about a very definite sense of who and what we are, and that idea of personal responsibility is central to that. And that idea of personal responsibility and looking out for your family and looking out for the people around you is very much, I think, of what small c conservatism and philosophical conservatism is all about. And I think that's a very, very good thing. Yes, there are people like Andrew Tate, but we can really push back against that, and we can show positive male role models, because again, as I say, that is desperately what we need.
Philip Caselli from the New Culture Forum, thank you so much for joining us this evening. That was very fascinating and interesting indeed. And tell us what you think's going on. We've had some texts. Great conversation with Philip, Jonathan. Really interesting chat. We've had another one. Yes, white men have it the worst these days. We are forgotten. Another one coming in here. Talk. Good evening, Jonathan. We all know the underlying reason why we need to start having babies, which no one likes to talk about. There are certain groups of people that are breeding like rabbits, and in 20 years' time, I can see Christianity being overtaken and our country succumbing to other religions. That's Phil from Portsmouth. Phil, I've got to be honest with you, I don't like the tone, I don't like the way in which we're saying that. I get the passion sometimes, but you have to think before you text in there, buddy, because at the end of the day, this is not about a competition. What we want is just more children, okay? We want more children, more couples together. That's more important to me than anything else like that. Another one here from Carmen. Great balanced show, well done. On reform, what people are missing is what we've had Labour fail us. Is that we've had Labour fail us. Conservatives fail us, and even Lib Dems in their coalition fail us. Reform is for the many, our last hope to turn this country around. Let's stop talking through like the election is around the corner. Still a long way to go and plenty of time for reform to build their case. We have nothing left to lose. That's give Nigel time. Another one from Andrea. I'm happy for the two-child benefit cap to be lifted, but only for parents and children born in this country. Definitely not for immigrants or at all, regardless of how long they've lived here. Great show, Jonathan. Andrea from East Sussex. You know how to do it. Call in 0344 499 1000 to tell us what you think about Reform UK, about the Conservatives, about whether or not white men should be pleased or happy with themselves, or if they are the demons of society. Text in word talk to 87222 or follow us on X at talkTV. We're going to have a break, but we've got a great final hour, so make sure you come back and tune in, and we look forward to seeing you very soon.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back here to the home of common sense with me, Jonathan Gullis, on Talk, and I am sitting in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan on the political asylum today, and we've got a great final hour still ahead for you today. We've got next down the line a great guest and a great friend of Talk. That is Mr. James Price, former Conservative Special Advisor. James, buddy, how are you doing?
Yeah, it's very good to see you behind that desk. It suits you, my friend. How are you?
I need to lose a few pounds. They say the camera adds them, and they're certainly making me look bigger than I were intended. But I love what you're doing with the facial hair, by the way. I just think we need to go full handlebar tash, though, James, is what we're looking for.
This is the American Mrs. Price, who likes to do anything she can to put a bit of New World grit onto her old English gent. So the moustache is at her request.
Well, look, the first thing we're going to get into is Sir Lindsay Hoyle. But before, James, we start, I just thought I'd share with listeners and viewers, and even yourself, but I'm sure you'll know better than many. Sir Lindsay and I go back a little bit. Let's play the clip.
We know offshoring will cost a fortune, won't work, and will destroy lives and any credibility that the UK has left.
Just a minute. Mr. Gullis, you've been catching my eye far too often. If you don't behave, I'll have a word with your mother. Come on, shoot that ball.
Is the Prime Minister now also going to claim that he was the...
Order, Prime Minister. Mr. Gullis, we heard enough last week. I can't hear what you're saying. I might not be able to hear what you're saying, but I can certainly see your mouth moving. It'll be moving outside if it continues. Prime Minister.
Well, James, you know what I was like. I was pretty robust in that chamber, and Lindsay and I certainly had our back and forth. But I must say, I always found him to be an extremely personable person, but it is causing a lot of anger with our listeners. And I'm sure it will raise questions with someone like you, who's very fiscally conservative, that how on earth has he found himself having to increase his staffing budget by around £500,000 because he's now got 21 staff members rather than 12. He's had £300,000 of expenses and travel alone since he became Speaker in 2019, with the most recent trip to Malaysia, which I'm not quite sure why the Speaker of the House of Commons has to visit there, over the February half term, where he spent £25,000 on business class flights, hotels and restaurants for him and his staff. Do you feel the public, the taxpayers, being taken the mick a bit out of this?
It does seem like an awful lot of money, doesn't it? I've got to say, those are some excellent clips of you. I just wish that we could have had microphones nearer to whatever chuntering you were doing. You're putting off the speakers from the ghastly, was it Scott's Nats party in the first one, and trying to throw the now Prime Minister off his stride. Is it right that you used to hide in the gaps between the benches occasionally to hurl some good-natured abuse and throw these people off? That's part of the fun of PMQs and things like that makes this the best of all parliaments, and probably why, in fact, so many people want the Speaker from the British House of Commons to travel to all of these countries. And he's definitely a big improvement on his predecessor.
Absolutely.
I don't know how we managed to put up with John Bercow for as long as we did. So we should talk about these costs, but we should also be very grateful that we haven't got to deal with John Bercow for one more measly minute.
Do you think it's just quite sad? Because look, I know the Speaker well, like you say, and I actually deem him someone a friend, someone I really do get on with. He's always been very personal to me. In fact, since I lost my seat in Parliament, he's regularly reached out to just see how I'm doing and checking in on me. But he's got to be able to justify these costs. And look, I know there are some people vexed about the fact that he had over $50,000 spent on doing up his flat, but ultimately he lives in the Palace of Westminster, a very old and ancient building with the buildings attached. And actually that was part of a £7 million scheme of work, which was going and starting long before he was in the chair. Don't you think that people maybe need to give him a bit of slack, but at the same time, he's got to be remembered that he's as accountable to the taxpayer as the Prime Minister, to the Leader of the Opposition and all other members of Parliament, and that he should really think about, how many staff does he need? Do his staff need to go with him? Why is he going to places like Malaysia, for example? Why not go to parliaments in Canada, our Commonwealth partners and neighbours, for example?
Yeah, you're asking all the right questions, I think, about this, and we should disaggregate. We should separate the two different bits here. I think anything being spent on the Houses of Parliament themselves is a little bit different, and you'll know this better than most people, Jonathan, that the Houses of Parliament are in a really bad state, and we are only one dodgy bit of wiring away from a full Notre Dame, and no one wants to see those beautiful buildings go up in smoke, and especially parts like Westminster Hall that are pushing 1,000 years old. And frankly, it's been a pity that the MPs, including the speakers of both of them, or the last several, haven't had the kind of courage to say, right, we should all decamp from this place for a while and give it the proper restoration and renewal that it needs, because things are so damp and dingy and so much of it, including where the speaker lived. And it's a sort of sad metaphor and reflection on the sad state of the country writ large, isn't it? But you're right, that he needs to try and hold himself to a higher standard even than other MPs, and to answer these kind of questions. It'd be nice perhaps for him to do occasional press conferences and account for these sorts of things. I think that transparency and accountability is always the best disinfectant for these kind of things. And when you're hiding behind an ever larger staff to try and answer some of these questions, that's not the way to do it. We should be bold in saying that our parliament is worth spending money on. It's possibly even worth spending money on sending the speaker to parts of the world where democracy isn't as developed as it might be. But you can't hide in the shadows and do it. You've got to be bold and explain why you're spending other people's money the way you are. That's
a great point, James. Then just to be fair to the speaker, we did get a response a number of weeks ago, which still stands, which is a spokesperson for the Speaker's office said, and it's quite lengthy, I've asked listeners for forgiveness, and it's certainly not the plain-speaking Sir Lindsay Hoyle that I know. The quote is, as in common practice across the world, the Speaker gives and receives gifts when hosting dignitaries as a token of friendship and relationship building between nations and parliaments. All items are declared proactively, regardless of the £300 threshold applied by the MP's Register of Interests, to ensure transparency and to avoid conflicts of interest. In consultation with parliamentary officials, a decision is made as to whether a gift would make a meaningful addition to the Speaker's House historic collection, and if it should go on display. If the item does not meet those criteria, for example, perishable goods, it is either retained personally by the Speaker or his office. As part of his welcome to visiting dignitaries and to cement friendships, many of the gifted ties and cufflinks are worn by the Speaker, and decorative heritage items relating to that country are put on display. James, this goes, I think, again to kind of what you're saying there, which is this is good old Westminster gobbledygook, and someone in our 21 staffing body has come up with this. Look, I'm offering to Sir Lindsay Hoyle now, who, as I say, is a good man in my opinion, but has got to be able to justify. I'll happily come on behalf of Talk and sit down and do an interview with him so he can explain and justify it, because I think when people hear him and how plain spoken and how upfront he is, I think people will move on.
Yeah, do you know what? That's a really good idea. I think that he should take you up on that. And I think that, as you say, a good plain-speaking person, and too much of Westminster are normal plain-speaking people who get caught up in this kind of stuff. And you've got dodgy advisors like me in the shadows saying, no, please don't say that. Please don't say what you really think and all the rest of it. This happened with your one-time Conservative colleague, now Reform MP, Lee Anderson, who was known for being no nonsense. And yet when they shamefully kicked Rupert Lowe out of the Reform Party, Lee Anderson put up some HR nonsense comment. Do you remember this? That was like, oh, well, according to legal best practice and all this stuff. And if Reform are doing this as well, the HRification of Britain is complete. And I think we're the poorer for it. Let's have a proper, open, frank conversation. You should be the one doing that interview. I think that would be a great idea. And people can then make up their minds hearing it from the horse's mouth, as it were.
Now, talking about Reform UK, James, obviously you were a former Conservative Special Advisor. I'm keen to get your views on the announcement today from Nigel Farage that he would scrap the two-child benefit cap, he would reintroduce in full the winter fuel payments, and I think where I think is actually a Conservative policy, or certainly putting the tanks on Conservative ground, have the personal tax allowance transferable for married couples. But overall, and of course, raising the personal tax threshold to £20,000, in total estimated by the IFS to be £50 to £80 billion. What do you think of all those measures? And do you think Reform, as Tim Montgomery has said earlier, are going to suffer from a serious credibility problem, as some of our callers and texters are saying, if they cannot make the sums add up? It feels like there's a lot of people hoping Reform will do well, but they feel like Reform might be shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah, absolutely. You just said that. I'm a former Conservative advisor, and I love a lot of what Reform have been saying up until very recently. And, I don't know about you, even I have been tempted to think, do you know what, maybe this is the best way for the country. And every time I start thinking that, they go and do something really stupid. And some of these announcements are, I'm afraid, just that. I agree with some of them. I definitely agree that reducing the burden of tax on people as a small c Conservative measure is a great thing. Tax, I think, is a maybe necessary evil, but it's certainly an evil in lots of cases. I think, though, that this idea of removing the two-child benefit cap, let's just impact what that actually means for a second. That means that Nigel Farage now thinks that you hard-working taxpayers watching this and listening to this at home or on the move should pay for the upbringing of people who cannot afford to raise their own children themselves. I just got married recently. I'm looking at starting a family very soon, but it makes you have to make a lot of difficult decisions. No more fancy holidays, all these sorts of things, in order to get your finances ready to look after the children you bring into the world. And I just don't think it's right that you should be making other people pay for your kids. And by the way, the vast majority of the British public agree with me, according to the polling on this. It's very weird that Farage is going and doing some of this economically illiterate stuff just to try and nab a few more Labour votes. And as you say, Jonathan, it sounds like people at home are calling in and they're seeing through it. Why are they making these sorts of big mistakes? It's a big problem for the country if they were to get in and then cause another run on the pound, another run in bond markets, and not be able to make their sums add up and make the socialists look like the responsible ones.
Luke Trill on X, obviously the head of More in Common, interestingly posted about the fact that under Blair there used to be this 3-second, 30-second, 3-minute rule, and he totally agrees, and voters agree, that on the 3-second rule that people say lifting the two-child benefit cap, ridiculous. People should only be able to have children if they can afford them. But once you go into the 30-second, 3-minute conversation, and it talks about child poverty and eliminating child poverty or removing children from poverty, the opinions start to change. Do you think this is just simply an era of comms where, for example, Reform UK could actually try and pivot, because it would, by some estimations, lift 500,000 children out of poverty? Or do you still think, regardless, there's other measures that would be much more meaningful?
Yeah, it's a really good way to frame it and to think about it, I think. And I think you're right. As soon as you start hearing about child poverty, people go, oh, hang on, that sounds very important. And of course, there are, it should be pointed out, lots of different measures and metrics of what poverty actually means. Absolute poverty, people living on less than $1 or $2 a day in parts of the developing world. And because of the wonders of free market capitalism, there's very little of that and ever decreasing amounts of that absolute poverty around the world. We're talking about relative poverty here and other different measures and metrics of it. But if you want to tackle that, the best way to do it is to have a shed load of economic growth and have that be the way of pulling people out. As Ronald Reagan once said, the best welfare program in the world is the dignity of a job. And that's a really important thing. And we make it more difficult than we should for that. We have energy prices really high. You mentioned the winter fuel payments there as well. Well, that's government getting in the way of production of energy. And there are all kinds of ways that the state gets in the way and gums up these things that otherwise the market and free thinking individuals and families and businesses could bring more people out of poverty much better than government taxing people really inefficiently, swilling the money around in the Whitehall we've just been talking about, and then reallocating it in different ways. And those are the sorts of pro-growth, pro-Britain policies that actually Reform should be talking about. The Conservatives are talking about this, which I think is good. And the Labour Party, I fear, will truly never understand, which is why things are going to be that much worse come the next election and whoever takes over after the horrible socialists who are in at the moment.
Now, Gawain Towler, the former head of press for Reform UK, was in at the very start of the show at 7 p.m. today, and he said actually the problem is that people aren't looking at the policy on it. They're looking at the policy on its own rather than in the whole. And they're talking about family, and that he would say by having the marriage allowance that's transferable, that's a tax cut and that's a positive thing for family. That by lifting the threshold to 20,000 for when people start paying tax, that removes a lot of people out of the welfare system altogether, and so therefore they wouldn't need to have the two-child benefit cap come in. Do you think that's a fair assessment, or do you think that, again, that Nigel Farage trying to straddle the right-wing populism, as it's dubbed, is going to come back to bite him and haunt him? Because if he over-promises and under-delivers, or if he can't make the sums add up, then people are just going to be despondent entirely.
Yeah, you got it. If you can't make the sums add up, we've seen from Liz Truss what happens there. We've seen from other countries around the world. And we should set all of this in the context that Britain has. The reason I keep having a pop at the Labour Party in calling them a bunch of socialists is that, as Mrs. Thatcher once said, the problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money. We're already taxing people as much as you can possibly tax them, at highest levels since the Second World War. The pips are really squeaking on that. And we're seeing more and more rich people leaving Britain than are leaving any other country in the world. We're not just talking people who are rich because of houses and things like that. Liquid millionaires, lots of them leaving, tens of thousands, and 10,000 of those people leaving is equivalent to 500,000 of the rest of us. So we're already seeing problems there. We're already seeing huge eye-watering debts that we're in, numbers that I can't get my head around. £3 trillion is the net public sector debt that we're in at the moment. When you realise that actually we haven't worked out how we're going to pay for state pensions and public sector pensions, that goes to something like £12 trillion, just numbers I can't even begin to calculate. And every year, rather than paying that debt down, that debt figure is getting higher, and the amount of money that we're spending just to service that debt goes up and up and up every more. We spend more money just servicing that debt, not paying it down, not getting rid of it, just keeping it going, and it's getting bigger, than we do on the whole defence budget. So this idea that Farage can just throw around, or this, oh, well, we'll have a tax cut here that we won't fund, and we'll do another load of benefits here and there and everything. I'd love for it to work, but the sums aren't going to add up. And if Reform do get in and they make a massive mess of things, we lose perhaps our last best chance of a right-wing government, whether it's Farage or whether it's the Conservatives next time. And then the country really is going to be, well, I don't want to say it even after the watershed, but we're going to be in deep trouble.
Well, I totally agree with you. And look, in Stoke-on-Trent, for example, the Labour-led City Council since 2023 has now had 2 government bailouts to the tune of £56 million. That's now costing the taxpayer on the interest alone £10,000 a day, not including the hundreds of millions of other debt that are on the balance sheet already. This is a gargantuan issue, and to be fair to Reform, they have been the ones talking about debt, but like you say, they're going to have to make the sums add up. You can't add more debt and have more people on welfare at the same time of then promising massive tax cuts too, and somehow expect the markets to go with you. We've already seen some of the rumblings in America. Look, James, you stay put. Listeners, you keep tuning in, because when we come back after the break, we're going to be discussing Boris Johnson, should he come back and can he save the Conservative Party, as well as talking about whether or not Sir Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves are simply on the clock as they undermine their own fiscal credibility with U-turn after U-turn. Call in 0344 499 1000, text in the word talk to start your message to 87222, or message us on X at talkTV. We'll see you shortly.
The police are still at the beginning of their investigation, and what they won't do is release information that they're not sure of. Otherwise, it leads to problems further along the line should there be any criminal or other court proceedings. They've been bitten like that a few times in the past. And so despite the pressure for them to constantly be telling more and more and more, they will only reveal information at the appropriate time when they're satisfied that it is actually correct.
It is a team game.
Yeah.
And Rupert, I think, is constitutionally unable to be a team player. Now, there are things that could have been done to mitigate that. He could have been given work to do. The devil does make work for idle hands. He could have been given a job. Go away and draft and come up with an immigration policy, Rupert. Come back to us after doing the hard work, doing the hard graft, doing the miles, getting the information, doing the research. Come back to us with a reasoned, considered immigration policy to take forward.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back here on Talk with me, Jonathan Gullis, sitting in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan on his Political Asylum show between 7 and 10 p.m. And Kevin will be back shortly with you in his usual slot, having covered for the great Mike Graham. Then we've got down the line, and a guest with me is James Price, former Conservative Special Advisor, who's done a great job so far at giving us a lowdown on reform. But now let's pivot to the Conservative Party. Well, James, we've had the whispers and the rumours that manoeuvres are underway to find a way of ousting Kemi Badenoch, although when you ask MPs on the record, they of course strenuously deny it. Always the dark and bad sign, as you and I both know. And then we've got whispers that Boris Johnson has supposedly been reaching and whispering out to see what the view is about him coming back. But then some senior Conservative members of Parliament suggesting there is, quote, no appetite to see Boris Johnson return, and they see him as being unpopular with floating voters, and that the political landscape has changed, as well as believing one shadow cabinet minister telling The Telegraph they couldn't think of a, quote, a single one of their colleagues who thought Mr Johnson returning would be a good thing. James, is Boris Johnson the last saviour of the Conservative Party as we know it?
Having criticised Nigel Farage just before the break and now about to criticise Boris, I just can only plead for regular talk listeners to remember that I am hopefully consistently, robustly right of centre in all my views. No, I don't think that Boris is the answer to this. Look, there was so much potential to him, right? You got elected in that landslide. I was working on the team that led on Boris's events, and every time you'd see Boris in the 2019 general election popping up at 4 a.m. in the Great Grimsby Fish Market, it was Muggins here who picked out the most photogenic fish for him to pose. I did my bit to try and get that man elected and worked in those governments and saw up close, unfortunately, how dysfunctional it all was. And also, I think that whilst he may seem popular in terms of polling at the moment, a lot of that might be name recognition because more people have heard of him than lots of other people, and people do not connect Boris to a lot of the policy failures of his government. And all Keir Starmer and Nigel Farage would have to do were they to go up against him, just hold up a big chart about immigration statistics. You'd say it's very, very high for a long time. It's much higher than people ever really think about and realise. But there is a massive spike that happens that is known as the Boris wave, and this is when Boris bungled the immigration rules, and we have now been flooded with a huge number of low-skilled migrants from alien cultures and from all around the world who have been causing all kinds of economic and other cultural maladies to the country, and that, I'm afraid, is largely through weak leadership on Boris Johnson's part. So no, I don't think he is the answer at all.
What do you think about Kemi Badenoch? It seems that the polling is going all the wrong direction. We're now polling regularly between 17 and 19%, in two pollsters having her as being more or behind the Liberal Democrats now in fourth place. However, there is a ray of sunshine, as you can see from what's on the screen, but for listeners who are tuning in via their radios, there was a YouGov survey that suggested that Kemi Badenoch is actually more popular than Nigel Farage. If people had to choose between them two for who would be Prime Minister, do you think it's just a case, as Kevin Hollinrake, the Shadow Secretary of State for Communities, Housing and Local Government, said earlier, about holding our nerve and not getting panicked? Or is Kemi on the clock?
I think she is on the clock, as you say, and anybody would be, because it's such a momentous uphill climb for her to make. It's not just the worst ever election defeat that Rishi Sunak led the Conservatives to last year, and therefore the smallest number of Conservative MPs there have been in hundreds of years. It's the fact that the Conservative Party has lost this idea of what it's for. What is the story that we're telling? The story that's going to try and make Britain a better place. We should be so well placed to make those kinds of stories, because I don't think that the Socialists and the Labour Party have any great love for the country, and I don't think that the Reform Party have yet got a good grasp on the right kind of policies and where the bodies are buried and the sorts of radical changes, reforms you might say, that are really needed in the country. And yet, because we haven't had a proper story on either of those fronts, the Conservatives are really suffering. And Kemi, I think, whilst she was really quite robust and outspoken when she was a minister in government, she now feels, again, like we talked about with Lindsay Hoyle, all these advisors, and they're all good people, but people warning her to be more careful, more conciliatory, trying to reach out and all these things. And I think that's a mistake. I think that she should just go guns out, proper red meat right-wing Conservative the way that she is, because that's what she actually believes. And although some people might not believe or agree with some of that, it's always better when you see a politician being authentic on these things and just coming out and saying what a total mess we're in, and we can't just hide behind, oh well, you know, we're still working out our policy platform, not when there is such a strong reform revival going on at the moment.
Obviously this poll from YouGov also posed another interesting question. Nigel Farage comes last behind every other leader, about 14 points behind Sir Keir Starmer, 15 points behind Sir Keir Starmer, 14 points behind Ed Davey, and obviously 4 points behind Kemi Badenoch. Is Farage a problem for reform? Can Nigel Farage outdo that polling in order to get himself into number 10? Or is reform nothing without Nigel Farage?
It's a really, really good question, isn't it? You may remember in about 2013, 2014, certainly, when UKIP won those European elections that kind of forced David Cameron to pledge a referendum on our membership of the EU. There was this weird phenomenon whereby the more popular Nigel Farage got, the less popular the idea of Brexit became, because he is such a polarising figure. And I think when you take somebody like Rupert Lowe, who I just think is absolutely superb, out of the reform mix, they're down a name there. And then they're down sort of, what else have they got? Who else are they? What kind of infrastructure have they got? And it becomes a very Farage one-man band. And he has a huge number of very admirable qualities to him, Nigel. He clearly does love his country the way I don't think Keir Starmer does. Clearly has an amazing ability to communicate and to jump on new technologies as well. He's massive on things like TikTok that I won't go anywhere near because it's a Chinese spying app, but he's very effective at these kinds of things. And I wonder whether he'll have enough steam to kind of get himself to the next election, and also whether, who else is going to be joining reform if they do win. It might have been said, I think it was an American called William F. Buckley Jr., who was the founder of the National Review, a very famous right-wing magazine in America, who said that he would rather have the first couple of hundred names in the phone book than the current members of Congress running the country. And that may end up being what you get with reform. And that might be a good thing because they're not horrible swamp creatures like me. But it may be that they are then totally bamboozled by the blob, by the civil service, into not getting the kind of radical reform done. I think the best possible thing would be some kind of either official or unofficial merger a few years down the line of the best of the Reform Party, the best of the Tories, so we know where the bodies are buried and you have the kind of revolutionary fervour that's needed to smash up that blob and smash up socialism and save Britain.
Now, on the counterpoint, however, Merlin Strategy, another pollster, we're awash with pollsters these days, did a direct comparison on opinions of voters versus Nigel Farage and Sir Keir Starmer, where Nigel Farage beats Sir Keir Starmer on honesty, bravery, represents my interests, tells the truth for working people and understands people like me. So there is a glimmer of hope. Or is it just because Sir Keir Starmer is so dreadful?
He's certainly dreadful, isn't he? You say we're awash with pollsters. Merlin Strategy are a new outfit and they're excellent and are doing some really good work, and people should check out the other polls that they're doing. And look, I think it would be actually quite an interesting litmus test for future Conservative parliamentary candidates and other people. Put a bit of truth serum into you. Who would you rather be Prime Minister at the end of the day, Keir Starmer or Nigel Farage? Farage, despite some of the silly lefty policies he's come out with today, is clearly a right of centre patriot who loves his country, and Conservatives of big C and small c should obviously prefer him to someone like Keir Starmer, who doesn't give a fig for this country and its traditions and is busily selling off, or not even selling off, paying to give away territory like the Chagos Islands, and who knows if he goes to give away Gibraltar or the Falklands next. So I think that all right-thinking people would prefer Nigel Farage to Keir Starmer. Absolutely right. It's just whether or not there are enough people that aren't put off by Farage, and why perhaps it might be great to go into some kind of alliance either before or after the next election. The one thing we cannot let happen is Keir Starmer to still be Prime Minister after the next election, because then it really would be curtains, I think, for Britain.
And last one from me, James. Obviously, we've had the massive U-turn. Well, U-turn announced, but with no actual policy to back it up on winter fuel. We're having the briefings into the papers about the potential U-turn on the two-child benefit cap too. Has Sir Keir Starmer completely shot any remaining credibility that Rachel Reeves and the public finances had under her and, let's be honest, his watch? But will Rachel Reeves be the one who has to take is kicked to the curbside in order to think they might save Sir Keir Starmer? Or is Morgan McSweeney, who was allegedly always plotting the secret shadow campaign for Wes Streeting when Sir Keir Starmer was in opposition, going to get his wish and put his man into number 10, that man being Wes Streeting?
Gosh, a big question there. I mean, poor Wes Streeting, the guy's going to lose his seat at the next election, whatever happens. He almost lost it last year due to the kind of loony Gaza people who only care about those issues. That seat has changed a lot of different ways, and I think those people are not very keen on some of the immutable characteristics that Wes Streeting has. I think he's a very impressive guy, and I think that he's the one person, it seems, in this Labour government who's trying to actually smash up the blob I've just mentioned. He abolished this ridiculous quango of NHS England. I couldn't tell you what on earth it does. Maybe you could.
No.
And so he's taken direct power back into his own hands, which is excellent. I just don't think he'll ever have any power in his hands after the next election. And whilst we all might think that Rachel Reeves is a complete clown, and she did lie on her CV, as we know, and all these various other things, let's remember she's the best they've got, right? She may have fibbed on her CV, but she's still got more private sector experience than the rest of that cabinet put together. So we should be very careful who might end up going into number 11 if she ends up being ousted, because it's going to get even worse, which I think is the number one lesson I could tell people about politics. It can always get worse.
James Price, former special advisor for the Conservatives, thank you so much for joining us here on Talk, a good friend of the show and of the channel. Now, lots of calls and lots of texts that we'll be coming to after this next break, but you make sure in these final minutes that you get your call in 0344 499 1000 or text in with the word TALK at the start of your message on 87222 or follow us on X at talkTV, and we'll see you shortly.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. Me, Jonathan Gullis, sitting in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan on the Political Asylum here on the home of common sense. That is Talk. Thank you to all our amazing guests, and thank you to all of you texting and calling in. Let's get to one of our first callers, Neil from Oxford, who wants to talk about the birth rate and reform. Hello, Neil.
Hello, Jonathan. Hi, good evening.
Thank you so much for calling in. What do you want to say?
Well, first I'd like to unpack this conversation. The first thing I would like to mention is that I think we're in a time when people, younger generation, people are finding it difficult to get into marriage and relationships that lead to marriage to start off with. Now, there's a lot of uncertainty, and that involves economic uncertainty and job prospects, uncertainty of job continuity. So that makes it quite difficult for a lot of people, especially the younger generation in their 20s and 30s and mid-30s, to invest in marriage. Now, marriage to have families and children. I personally think that what we're experiencing now is a situation where marriage has needs to be more invested in. We need to invest more in the appeal of marriage for longer term progress and prospects. I think what has happened nowadays, because of the uncertainty, economic uncertainty, a lot of families, people who are getting married, aren't quite sure about how they can raise a family and what they can achieve with the financial instabilities that are happening over many years. Now, Nigel Farage has mentioned that he wants to put a cap on up to 2 children for the benefits that...
Yeah, he wants to lift the cap on that, yes.
He wants, yes, absolutely. So I think that's a good thing in some ways, because it encourages families to want to not just have more certainty in their lives, but also certainty in having a family as well. I think what we're looking at now is to bring back those values of family and marriage and family for the longer term interests, not for the short term interests, for career progression and stepping stone career progression and career change. It's very much important that we see a longer term value for marriage and for the family institution of a community and of a family unit that really is a bedrock of what we call society. And I think what we're looking at here is to bring that certainty back in this time of economic instability and uncertainty. The concern I have is that if, for example, we continue with such a difficult economic viability in the grassroots society, it discourages people to get married and to have children, and at the same time, it makes people feel as if there's an economic form of sterilization going on, where people are discouraged from getting married and having children because they don't see any future in their lives and in the children's lives, because they can't maintain the needs to hold a roof over their head and for the long term, and to have a family that they can actually invest in to build a loving connection and relationship with themselves and with their children.
Well, thank you so much.
Very important.
No, well, thank you, Neil, for calling in, and thank you for sharing your thoughts. And I think there's a lot on there that a lot of listeners are certainly texting in and agreeing with. If I can just get to my next caller, which is Craig from Yorkshire, who also wants to talk about the child benefit cap and seeing what he thinks. He mentions Hong Kong, and I can see that the producers are kindly giving me a note. Hey, Craig, how are you?
Hi, Jonathan. Good evening. I'm very well. Lovely to hear you on the radio. So for some background, we haven't spoken before, but I did live overseas in Hong Kong, well, for a short period of time, 30 years to be precise. So I know the Hong Kong tax code pretty well, having filed the personal assessment forms there, for practically 30 years non-stop. And what they do there, they do offer a child allowance, and it's not means tested or capped in any way. Well, They allow an allowance for the 1st to the 9th child, would you believe?
Wow.
And what the allowance is effectively the ability to earn an additional £13,000 per child of tax-free income. So what Farage is proposing with his 20 plus 25 in a married unit, where the first £45,000 of income would be tax-free, which I fully support and welcome. What I think he should be clarifying is the child allowance itself shouldn't be a paid allowance to everybody with children. It should, in my opinion, be a child allowance paid in the form of a tax-free benefit to working families to support people who are in work, who are, not dependent on the state, to fund the existence of their children.
Craig, sorry. Can I just quickly correct you only briefly, just to say that what they're proposing from Reform UK is they lift the personal threshold to 20,000 and then will allow 5,000 to be transferred. So it'd be 25,000 rather than 45. Not that that's any of your fault, believe me, I had to check it over and over again myself. Does that still work or do you think actually they need to go higher?
Well, I thought, you're perhaps correcting me from what he said earlier, I thought if everybody would have an allowance of 20,000, but there would be an additional 5,000 if you were in a married unit. But I could have got that wrong. But I do welcome the allowance, as it would rise to 20 anyway. So in a family unit, there would be at least a tax-free joint income of the first 40,000 at least. Then.
And what about the child? And what about the child benefit cap? Obviously, a lot of people saying this isn't conservatism or centre-right politics. This is giving. Some people would say, people sitting on benefits, not working, not contributing, getting a freebie, which will bloat the welfare state. Is that a fair argument, or do you think it's actually about trying to eradicate child poverty?
Well, unless there's some clarification, but as I've outlined in the Hong Kong case, and what I believe we should be doing here, is you should have an additional allowance of tax-free income before you start paying tax. So it could be 20 plus 20 plus, let's say, 15,000 for every child that you have. So you can enjoy keeping more of your own salary for every child that you have. So it's an allowance that is offset against taxable income, as opposed to just a benefit for the feckless, sitting at home, just knocking out kids, one after the other. They wouldn't, in my ideal, be rewarded for that behaviour at all. So it would reward the families families who would be more concerned with the long-term outlook for their children and society and the country in general, as opposed to, people just wanting to live a life on benefits.
Very interesting. So yes, looking at how the tax system can incentivise rather than adding additional weight to the welfare system. Craig from Yorkshire, thank you so much for joining us with your call there. Just to read out a few texts, I've got Marty here. Women want equality. Where's the equality for men who wish to be fathers in the UK family courts? That's Marty. Another one, Catherine from Cardiff. Jonathan, brilliant section on masculinity. I fully support everything your guest was saying. I am no apologist for men, but as a woman with a brother, husband, son and grandsons, I have talking against the demonisation of males for years. Well done. Time for you to fight back. Thank you, Catherine from Cardiff. Another one from Carmen. I listened to Nigel's announcement today and it seems Reform voters haven't bothered listening to it. I agree with the majority of what Nigel said and the trust they will try to rectify what the Conservatives and Labour have done. Michelle, why is the man's identity not going to be made public not going to be made public? Is it because his name will reveal he isn't British at all? Michelle, I'm assuming you're getting caught up here about potentially the Liverpool thing. I mean, the police were out the gates very quick to identify the male in terms of his age, where he's from, his ethnicity, which I think are important things, lessons from Southport, and I think that was a good lesson learned there. Another text from Anne. Jonathan, Boris, no thanks. He was and remains a busted flush. Dan from Kent, you're living under a cloud, Tim. This is to Tim Montgomery. Farage will be the next PM simply because the Tories and Labour have turned our democracy into a two-party dictatorship. The people are willing to gamble. What have we got to lose? Well, I'm not sure Tim Montgomery, a very good strategist, would want to take that risk there. Well, look, you know how to do it. You call in 0344 499 1000. You text in the word talk to 87222, or you follow and message us on X at talkTV. We're going to have a break and then we're going to take some more calls and we'll see you shortly.
2029. That would have been a useful thing.
Aspirational, I suppose, rather than a prophecy. I'm not trying to say that I definitely know for sure. I'm suggesting or making the argument that so many major things have happened that the woke movement as we've known it is coming to an end. There's too many things. There's the Supreme Court ruling saying that biological sex in the Equality Act means biological sex. There's the Cass review, which led to the puberty blockers being banned. We've had DEI being stripped out of major corporations across the world. The election of Trump and him saying, with these executive orders regarding no more men in women's prisons, no more men in women's sports.
It's unusual to have the skin colour of somebody mentioned at this point. Why would that have been the case, do you think?
Because of the irresponsible behaviour of people on social media and some in the mainstream media, which we saw with the incident only down the road in Southport. The police, if they've not got any grounds to think it's terrorism, will say so really early on. It's quite sad, really, that the police...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, it's the final countdown with me, Jonathan Gullis, sitting in for the great Kevin O'Sullivan on the Episcopal Asylum here on the home of Common Sense. That is Talk. And before I get ready to hand over to Petri, who comes in between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m, and what a great show she'll be doing, let's take more of your calls. Grace from London, who wants to give us her opinion on Nigel Farage. Hello, Grace, how are you?
I'm very blessed, thank you. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Thank you so much for calling in. I've got a little note here. It says lots of people can be both right-wing and left-wing. Do we need to move away, do you think, from this sort of strict, narrow political ideology path that many natural sort of politicos like me might try and define people under, and realise you can float about and there's no harm in having that?
Yeah, I think we're all a bit more complicated than just being left-wing or right-wing. The phraseology originates in pre-revolution France, where people who were supportive of the monarch would sit on his right in the court and people who were opposed to the monarch would sit on his left in court. But we've come to use the terms left and right to refer to all sorts of disparate causes, and actually I think many of us have opinions that can be in different places on the political spectrum. For example, I would agree with Farage when he said that it shouldn't be the case that abortions can happen up to 24 weeks. Now, obviously, there will be instances where there are medical emergencies and they're necessary later, but in non-emergency situations, I would concur with him that they shouldn't be allowed up to 24 weeks, and that would be considered a right-wing opinion for me to have. But then there are many other causes on which I am certainly left of centre, and I think quite a lot of people are like that. So I think that left and right is not always a fully accurate way of describing things, and for people to use the phrase far right is sometimes not necessarily a good way of describing things that they're concerned about. There are some opinions labelled as far right which I think are very concerning, but to call them far right isn't necessarily the best way of explaining why those opinions are concerning, for example.
So do you think, out of interest, sorry, Grace, that Nigel Farage is just ahead of the curve? That essentially he's dismantling the Westminster system because for so long it's focused as just Labour or Conservative, centre-left versus centre-right. And what Nigel Farage is doing is going where more and more people are because they can maybe access more and more information or hear and see more and more options before them when it comes to who they wish to elect, which is sometimes there's nothing wrong with liking a little bit from what the Conservatives say and a little bit from what Labour says. Ultimately, as long as it's founded in common sense, is believable and delivered, then people are willing to give it a go.
To some extent, and there's definitely a degree to which politicians have not really listened to the public enough and they need to do some more. But what I tend to feel about Nigel Farage, based on when I spoke to him on a number of occasions when he was presenting on LBC, is that he seems to me to have a bit of a kind of predetermined narrative, and he's not necessarily actually listening to what people are saying or looking at the facts and how you make things add up. I remember on one occasion particularly speaking to him when he was asking people to phone in with their thoughts on the flag and whether we feel proud of our flag. And I called in and I explained how ultimately that the flag we have is a cross which links back ultimately to Jesus having died on the cross for our sin. And that's in contrast to the idea of pride. So I don't feel proud. I think about how I am sinful and I need Jesus' forgiveness rather than feeling a sense of pride and, you know, I might be better than someone else who's got a different flag or nationality. But he didn't really listen to what I was saying at all. He just kind of continued with saying, oh, let's all feel proud of... And my point being that he has his script and he's sticking to it and he can make it sound very appealing, but as some other people who've worked closely with him, including Rupert Lowe, who I don't agree with at all about anything really, but similarly he said, I think, you know, Farage is kind of his own messiah-like figure. He wants to have lots of fans. He's not necessarily working with others or maybe listening to others around him, and you kind of need for someone who's going to be a leader to listen and to engage with the reality on the ground, whereas it seems to me he's kind of just a personality who wants people to follow along with his script. And I'm not sure that he can necessarily fulfill the things he's presenting, because he's great as a personality who can stand up and say that he's going to achieve certain things, but he needs to listen to the realities and the nuances of what's actually happening around him. Otherwise, he's not going to be able to fulfill what he claims he's going to.
Well, Grace, thank you so much for that great call. Very insightful, really interesting opinion there, and lots for you, the listeners, to think about. Let's go now to Stephen in Cambridgeshire, who wants to talk about Kevin Hollinrake. He is the Conservative MP and Shadow Secretary of State for Communities, Housing and Local Government. Stephen, how are you?
Hello, Jonathan. Fine, mate. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for calling in. What did you think of Kevin Hollinrake and what he was saying?
Waste of space.
Oh, wow. Very blunt and to the point, like it. Why?
Because I appreciated the fact that you pointed out to him that a lot of the policies that are put forward by true Conservatives are shot down by the wets in the party.
It's true. It's true.
I think if Kemi Badenoch wants to succeed, or even Robert Jenrick, they need to go put forward a list of people they're willing to kick out of the Conservative Party that aren't Conservative and start from scratch. They're not going to lose anything. They're that far behind in the polls. You're not going to lose anything.
Do you think, and that's a really interesting point, Stephen, and there's certainly, I know, Conservative members, just general members, who think there needs to be a show of force. Do you think it requires something that bold, that direct, that headline grabbing, essentially, to even get the public or a section of the public to even tune into the Conservative Party and consider that they may be willing to listen to what they have to say?
Yeah, because they had 14, there was 14 years, at one point an 80-seat majority, and they did absolutely nothing with it. People are turning to reform because Nigel says things, and all the reform MPs are all singing basically from the same hymn sheet. So people are willing to believe in that, as the Conservatives are at the minute. And I watched Mike Graham when he had Liz Truss on, and she admitted, like you said, it doesn't matter what the leader says or whatever. It's what happens in the background. It always gets stymied in the background.
Well, I think you make a great point. Look, Stephen, one of my biggest frustrations, as I say, is some of those people on the Conservative benches who has remained as MPs. I remember the things they said in meetings. I remember and hold the views that they held. I remember when they were all willing to suck up Boris Johnson to save themselves and save their seats so they could keep their job. But the moment troubled waters hit, they were happy to plunge the knife into their back to see the back of Boris Johnson, the man who had made them who they were. And it shocks me that a lot of those people now trying to sing off a hymn sheet that I know they don't believe nor agree in. And the first moment they get the chance to pivot, they will. And that really deeply frustrates me, because it's the members like myself who get deeply upset and hurt when we have members of Parliament who are not truly, in my opinion, representative of the membership or of the Conservative cause. Thank you so much for your call. We've got Bex in Essex who wants to talk about Reform UK when it comes to today's announcement. Hey, Bex, how are you?
Hi, Jonathan. I'm doing well. Hope you're okay.
I'm good, thank you. That's very kind indeed. I'm looking forward to the end of the show so I can nip to the loo, because when you keep getting lots of water and cups of tea brought into you, which is amazing from the incredible Gen Zers, I need to say now, behind the glass, you do end up needing the toilet break at some stage.
I can imagine. But
look, obviously, let's talk to you more importantly. Reform and benefits. What do you think about what Nigel Farage said today? Are you happy with what he's suggesting?
Not really. I'm someone who has previously been on benefits, and I have family members who are on benefits, so I'm not anti-benefits. However, I think that is the biggest problem with this country. We are too lavishing in benefits. There's everything for everyone and more, and that is exactly why we've got people flooding into this country from every other country, is because of our luxurious benefit system. And I think waving that around is just going to just promote more people wanting to come into the country. I don't believe also that people should get benefits for any more than 2 children. I don't agree with that at all.
Do you feel comfortable with the fact that Nigel Farage said that, for example, he was going to look, we might get more details around British citizens getting this? Would that give you some level of comfort?
If it was for British citizens, British-born citizens, then yeah, I think that would completely stop people from wanting to come over the country. Because why else would you want to come to the UK? It rains all the time. People walk around with a miserable face on them most of the time.
We love the rain. We love the rain, Bex, don't we? We love it.
We have unseasoned food. I mean, why else would anyone from all these other countries want to come here? It's all for the benefits. They're economic migrants. And I just think waving around all these benefits all the time is just helping no one. I think it's better for people to get better pay, better jobs, focusing on, and also helping people back into work who want to work, because there aren't opportunities. There's not really many opportunities at all. It's all like low paid, low skilled jobs.
Well, look, Bex, thank you so much for that great call. Wow, I tell you what, Reform UK got us some convincing to do, it feels, with their voters or people who may be more sympathetic and empathetic to their viewpoint. And as Tim Montgomery said, they're going to have to make the sums add up if they're going to have any chance. Reform can maybe undo reform. Let's see. Well, as we're waiting before we hand over to the fantastic Petrie, I've got a few more texts coming in. Chris from Surrey, why are people getting hung up on how a political party's policy announcement will be paid for, as if there's some household's budget to be adhered to? Che Goss, public funded salaries, Lammy's scoff bill, just stop Hoyle, Jolly's bill. Don't see any Rachel unaccounting for all that. It's all borrowed money and will never be paid back. Hashtag Gravy train. Okay, interesting. Giving a bit more leeway there. We've got Dan from Kent. You Westminster bubble are so out of touch. It's not the MPs are to blame. It's simply Parliament have lost touch with the common people. Well, I tell you what, there's a strong amount of feeling going through the voters today, and I think it's going to be fascinating for how Reform UK take this agenda on going forward. Ultimately, they're going to have to convince those voters, and I think we heard clearly the Conservative Party has got an awful lot of work to do. Actually, you know what? We're going to squeeze a call in. We're going to squeeze David from Kent in, who says Reform, they will live up to promises as much as they can. David, convince those who are maybe doubting Reform UK, a bit worried about today's announcement. Why should they hold their nerve?
Hello, Jonathan. Yeah, look, it's 4 years to next election, so, Nigel at the moment is not going to come out with a total breakdown like, it's just not going to happen at the moment, He's already given you ideas of where the money's going to be saved to be able to do some of the things he wants to do. But he's not going to do a full breakdown. I mean, Starmer, what did he say a year ago?
Fully costed, fully costed.
We wouldn't pay a penny more on our council tax, and I'm paying over 5% more on my council tax, so it didn't cost anything, mate. The last few years, they've just been not saying anything, Labour, just got into power. Now we want a fully costed manifesto from Reform 4 years out from an election.
You think it's unfair? There's this hypocrisy that maybe the media are giving Labour and the Conservatives more free rein to not have to say, but Reform UK are expected somehow to be held to a higher standard. There's a hypocrisy in that, no?
I think it's an hypocrisy, and I think it's quangos. I think it's OBR. I mean, I wouldn't trust them as far as I could throw the OBR. I mean, it's
their accuracy is pretty appalling. Their accuracy is pretty
so anything they say what something would cost is for the birds, really.
Sport England, that needs to go in the bin. Environment Agency, put that in the bin. Useless quangos.
Like, this Great British Energy, what is that? Over 8 billion quid or something? What's that actually producing,
I still don't know, David. I don't think any of us are ever going to get an answer.
So there's billions of pounds going in places that are not, are not funded, and, yet he says he's got this 22 billion black hole. And then there's people wanting to detail every single way he's going to pay. Nigel's going to pay for stuff. You're not going to get that at the moment.
Are you sick?
Maybe if Keir Starmer calls them a general election in the next few weeks, then obviously Keir will then, then Nigel will then put together, they'll put together the manifesto. But he's not obviously going to do that, is he? He's going to hold on until, the last possible lock-ins, really, I think,
Well, what a call to end on. David from Kent, thank you so much. People need to hold their nerve. People need to give Nigel Farage space and time. People need to realise we're only a year in. I know it might feel a lot longer, but we're only a year in to this Labour-led government. In fact, they haven't had their 1 year anniversary yet. July the 4th is when that will